You ready? Ready for action. Good evening, everyone. I will call the November 5th meeting of Dublin City Council to order. Ann, could you please call the roll? Here.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms. Here. Mr. Reiner.
Here.
Mr. Rosa.
Here.
Mr. Ludo. Here. Mayor Peterson.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here. Speaking of Ms. Fox, Jane, will you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. I would like to invite the Dublin Jerome men's golf team up here to the podium for a very exciting and special presentation. And for that, I will turn it over to Vice Mayor Grooms. For reasons that will become obvious here shortly. He is. It's the dapper one in the bow tie.
Well, hello, gentlemen. You certainly have accomplished a tremendous amount this year. I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit about their accomplishments before I read your proclamation. But my favorite golfer on the team, you all forgive me for having a favorite, right? My favorite golfer on the team is here. Tyler Grooms was the number 4 man this year, and it was really fun to watch. Jake was the alternate for the state championship team, and he did a great job of just being in a support role and helping all the guys manage the course. And Ryan Miller was our number 5 man. Ryan's a fun story. So Ryan didn't make the golf team, any golf team, at Dublin Jerome last year. And he worked so hard in the offseason, he came back and he made the A-team for his sophomore year. So he accomplished great things. Ethan Snyder, our lone junior on the team, he, I think, was the OCC Player of the Year. And he had a tremendous amount of accomplishments, won a couple medalists. We had 2 seniors on our team, Mason Wagner, and Mason's going to take his talents to Xavier University next year and play golf. But he has had, it's his second time, Ethan as well, it's his second state title in a row. Mason's second state title in a row also. Jackson Chandler was our number 1 man all year, and he's going to be playing at the Ohio State University next year. But you know, for this group of guys, they're only, it was theirs to lose. Before the season started this year, they were the team to beat, and everyone expected nothing less than a state championship from them. And that's a pretty hard thing to defend when everybody's gunning for you. And then the end of June, we lost Jackson's dad. Heartbreaking for the team and incredibly difficult. Jackson's dad was his biggest fan, and they lived and breathed golf together every single day. And we miss him, but I watched Jackson put his putt in on the 18th green, and it was pretty special. I think he looked up at the sky, and you felt like your dad was there with you. But the things they've overcome this year, for nothing that was what to be expected from them, was really tremendous. Coach Harley managed them all year long, and he did a tremendous job. They can be a group of knuckleheads for sure. And how he puts up, I just have to put up with the one knucklehead. I don't know how he puts up with the whole of them, but he did all season long, and it was really special. And to do what you guys accomplished this year under the conditions that you accomplished, carrying the weight of, you know, some of you escorted Jackson's father down the aisle at his service, right? It was hard. And to accomplish what you accomplished in the midst of your grief, when it was just expected of you, is a difficult thing to do. So, tremendous accomplishment for you all this year, and there's a proclamation that we have because your community is very proud of you. And I will read it. It says, whereas the Dublin Jerome High School men's golf team won the 2018 Division I State Golf Championship on Saturday, October 20th, 2018, marking the 8th state championship in program history in a second year in a row. And whereas the Celtics led by 5 strokes going into the final round, played at Ohio State Scarlet Course, and finished with a 25-stroke victory, and a 625 combined score for the 2-day tournament. And whereas the team led by Coach Taylor Harley has an overall record of 233-4, which includes its 15th consecutive league title in the OCC Cardinal Division. And whereas the members of the state championship Celtic men's golf team are Jackson Chandler, Mason Wagner, Ethan Snyler, Tyler Grooms, and Ryan Miller, and alternate Jake Yarborough. And whereas Jackson Chandler earned medalist honors along with the Green High School's Maxwell Mullivan, and Mason Wagner finished in a three-way tie for fourth place in the state tournament, with both Chandler and Wagner earning first-team All-State honors. And whereas the 2018 team won 14 regular season tournaments, including sectionals, which it won by 18 strokes, and districts, which it won by 16 strokes. Now, therefore, he, Gregory S. Peterson, Mayor of the City of Dublin, Ohio, on behalf of Dublin City Council, do hereby proclaim Friday, November 9th, 2018, as Dublin Jerome High School Men's Golf Team Day in the City of Dublin, and extend our congratulations to the team and their coach in its 8th state championship and another outstanding season. So, congratulations. And Jackson, Dublin Jerome has had a lot of tremendous golfers, and we've never had an individual medalist win the entire state. Jackson was co-medalist. He shot 77, 72. Played an excellent round day two. He came back fighting, and I think he had something to fight for, and he was fighting for his dad. And it was a tremendous thing to watch his putt go in the 18th hole, and he kind of knew he won, and we all knew he won, and it was really special. So congratulations on your accomplishments.
I think they want another. They want another photo.
Well, congratulations, gentlemen. Coach, you want to say anything? You want to say a couple words? You want to say anything, Coach? Yeah, well, she does that all the time. Every meeting I got to deal with that. Yeah. It's kind of like Jackson's kind of like, you know, that video of Tiger Woods on the Tonight Show when he was like 4. I kind of feel that way whenever you guys go off and make it to the tour. maybe they'll watch this video and they'll think of us. But congratulations, you guys. Really appreciate your representation of this city. Moving on to the citizen comments portion of our agenda, we had these sign-up sheets out there, and not one single person signed up. Is there anybody who didn't realize they needed to sign up that would like to come up and talk about whatever they want for 5 whole minutes? Seeing no hands, we will move along to the consent agenda. Is there anyone that would, well, I just move approval of the minutes of October 22nd, 2018. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second it.
Ann?
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox? Mr. Keenan?
And under the postponed items, we apologize to everyone that was involved. Christina, on the presentation at the last council meeting, we were, the hour was drawing late, and we postponed this and I don't think I at least did not realize how many people had stuck around for this report, so I apologize for that. But Julie, you want to come on up? Who's taking the lead on this?
I think Christine's going to
Christine?
take this, yeah.
Sure. Christina, would you like to open with any
Sure.
comments?
So Christine and Michelle and Julie came and presented to the Public Services Committee in September and gave us an overview of where things are with our aging in place effort, and decided that we should come to council and give you all an overview of where we are as well, and make an ask. And I'm going to let Christine
Sure.
go through all of it.
So members of council, good evening. And we're just going to give you a high-level overview of what was presented to the Public Services Committee in September. Staff has spent the better part of this year working on this council goal on aging in place. Julie Rinaldi, Executive Director of Centero, is here because she will be a critical partner, as you'll see in just a moment. We first gathered practitioners and professionals and agencies from around the state, all 3 of our counties, and locally here for an agency summit in March at Ohio University. We then moved into a series of facilitated conversations with over 200 of our residents and caregivers also. And then we took that data and measured it and presented it to all of those agencies and experts to say, okay, here's where we think we are. I will say that something a little bit of a different experience for us, it was a highly charged, highly emotional community conversations. There was clearly a sense of urgency among every resident who attended. We did also have to close these out. So one of the things we have committed to is to continuing these conversations. We were also fortunate enough to benefit from the corporate volunteer service of Cardinal Health Views, where we teamed up with 3 ethnographers who spent a day with us analyzing what we heard. We just wanted to be sure we heard it properly and that we get this right. And we framed it up in this way: how, for these citizens, can we make decision-making less stressful, create a sense of community belonging, get them the services they need, and discuss housing needs. These are the categories that came out of all of these sessions. And by the way, this doesn't really differ from most communities of this size and scope around the country. The first and most prevalent issue was housing. The second is transportation and mobility, which we've already kicked the football off and are working on. The third was a sense of needing a place to go. People just don't have a hub to go to or a place to look to, and there was a sense of us needing to create that. Clearly, services and health, wellness, and social services, and this idea of connections and engagement and living a purposeful life, and definitely decreasing the social isolation that tends to come with that. This is another way of looking at the next steps and areas of focus, the central hub services and connections of engagement. And in moving forward, our recommendations to the Public Services Committee of Council was to develop a website, co-locate somewhere navigators. So a concept came out from our residents that, like when you're in a hotel and you go down to the lobby, to the concierge and say, how do I get to this theater, or how do I get directions to that? This is what our citizens are asking for, is just someone to navigate, not provide the service, but get them off in the right direction. Solidify our partnerships with Ohio University, Centero. All of our area agencies are very clearly on board with this, as is our state agency. We are examining a village-to-village model. We have already convened an internal city staff team that will consistently look at best practices of inclusion for our older adult population. And we've already committed to continued engagement with residents and caregivers. Coming forward in the budget, we will be requesting for funds that you will see in addition to what you're already giving to Centero, in the amount of about $56,000 as a one-time request for this year to fund 2 part-time navigators. Here's the breakdown we presented to the Public Services Committee of 2 part-time navigators with 1 part-time supervisor overseeing everything, operating expenses, and a couple of laptops. What is currently in progress is we are working on developing a website, should that come to fruition. Some of you may have heard about an Alexa pilot project that we are working with Centero on. We have purchased some Alexa devices for 12 older adults and are measuring how this is helping aging in place. And let me tell you, it is changing lives, and our volunteers are proving that. We're looking at a co-location site. I've asked Leadership Dublin to work on one of its class projects to develop an age-friendly business certification. We are exploring village to village, and as you know, Joanne Shelley and the team in planning is working on mobility. So as we began to look at co-locating services, we realized an answer was sort of right in front of our faces, which was these wonderful partners that we already have with Centero. Rather than reinventing the wheel, we decided to partner with an agency who's already dabbling into the senior services sector, as well as has an intake process and a documentation process and a standing facility. So we met with Julie for half a day and brainstormed this concept. We haven't named it yet. I will tell you other communities tend to call them an aging well resource center type thing. We will work on a brand for this. But Julie is on board, and we are set for a day in December to plan on looking at grants, funding, and other opportunities as well. So that is a really, really quick overview of our recommendations to council, which we wanted you to hear about before you saw operating budget specifics come forward to you. Julie's here if you have any specific questions.
So that money for the 2 part-times and the supervisor is in the budget that we're in?
Correct.
It's already in there, so
Yep.
we can talk about it.
Correct.
Can you explain, and I'm just going to go ahead and admit my ignorance, what's an Alexa project?
The Alexa project actually came to us from Doug McCullough to say, you know, we really need to measure. If you're working on aging in place, let's talk about ways technology can address this. So we partnered with Centero to have them identify 12 Dublin residents who could use some assistance. We partnered them with trained up volunteers, and we are teaching these residents, these older adults, to use this Alexa device. They're using it for things like calling their friends, family, buddies, medication reminders. They're using it for reading. One of the clients, for example, is legally blind and is using it for audiobooks. So we are measuring, and we are about to close this chapter on December 31st to put an end to the pilot and then announce to the community what the results were. That's the Alexa project.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions from council? Chris?
I have one. This is a really terrific work, and thank you for taking it up. I know that Centero serves a community larger than just the Dublin community, and I think it's totally appropriate for us to begin this service. Is this a service that perhaps in the future we could partner with the other municipalities that Centero serves, and maybe we'll have a better idea, understanding of what our costs are, and maybe have some partnership in those costs in years moving forward?
I think those measurements would be a great idea to put into place. I think the answer is yes. Why not? They do serve Upper Arlington all the way up to Lewis Center. Is that right, Julie? Hilliard and Grandview as well. I think this opportunity gives us a chance to measure real data and look at trends and look at traffic on a website to say what are these things that are most needed, and that will speak better to funders as well as we look at diversifying the funding for this.
I would imagine those other communities would be very excited once we beta test this and work out the bugs and get our feet under us. I would imagine that those other communities would be very excited about participating and offering this to their residents as well.
I think you make a great point, and one of the things that we talked about in the Public Services Committee was what are the metrics and how do we know that these programs have been successful by the amount of use and working with Centero. And so that's definitely part of the process and the map to get us there. And other communities in the area are working on some similar efforts. Columbus, I think Worthington, they've already begun a village-to-village model. And you may have heard Columbus's effort is about to begin. They announced it a week or so ago. Other communities are handling this issue differently. The state of Maine has a ballot initiative on the ballot tomorrow, where they actually want to present a new tax, a 3.8% tax on wages and non-wage income that isn't already taxed by Social Security for folks who make $128,400, or more, to tackle the issue of aging in place. I don't know that that's something that we want to do. It's sort of demonstrative of, I think, the importance and how widespread this issue is. I think we would be very excited to think about what that would look like with other communities, because our borders they're not hard borders, right? We have to share these communities and these folks with each other. So you make a great point.
Columbus did gather surrounding municipalities at the Columbus Foundation last month, and I did attend, and I think people are really anxious to share best practice information. So, we've scanned the country. We're also looking at some best practices that are taking place in Scandinavia, and there are all sorts of different models. The beauty of this one is it's grassroots. It really we listened really closely to what residents are saying, as well as what our agency partners saying that they are serving. So we think the data we measure will probably be awfully close.
I have to say, Christina, that one of the things as I watched this and sat in on some of your sessions, what I think makes this extremely unusual and probably going to be most successful and get you where you want to go is the fact that you engage so many aspects of the people that are involved in the aging process, especially the residents. I mean, you had to close the doors. We had so many. So for you, and one of the things that you said was that you were surprised by some of the answers that you got.
I was.
So sometimes you can put the people that manage aging and they think they know the answers, but you don't really know the answers until you get the people in here that are aging in place or not aging in place to really give you the real answer. And so I commend you for going that route with the engagement of the residents, because I think you will have the most successful program of all. So congratulations.
Look, I think to end this conversation on my end, people want to stay here. They don't want to leave. They don't want to be siloed in an age-specific community. They want to stay here. And I think that was the basis of a lot of emotion at these conversations.
I think there was a tremendous amount of wisdom in partnering with Centero on this. We lost our dear neighbor Friday night, who was an elderly man, and the mental health issues that come along with aging in place for caregivers and everybody involved, it's going to be a great place to house that, because they can connect them with all the resources relative to aging in place, but then also all of the other resources with, grief and loss and all those other things that come along with it. So thanks for doing that, Julie.
Julie, is there anything you want to add? I mean, you guys, Centera is such a fantastic, I know that what you were looking forward to is me dragging you up here in front of the microphone, so I won't make you do that.
She rearranged her schedule to be here this evening.
I know that she was here a couple of weeks ago waiting, so Julie, Centera is just such a fantastic asset of ours and partner of ours. Every single time that there's something we need help with, we turn to you guys, and you always knock the cover off the ball. So thank you very much for what you're doing to help us in all the different aspects of our community. Anything else from council on this issue? Michael? Kathy?
The only question I had, I think it's great. Are there sufficient funds in there for the communication aspect of this to get the word out to folks who may or may not turn to necessarily the website? Is that answer? I looked at that and thought.
Right. So we hope to engage a lot of our neighborhood leadership in this, and we will sit down with communications and public information to come up with a strategy moving forward about how to best address this. Surprisingly, most people are web-based who attended these conversations. When we ask them how they want to receive that information, it is through a website. But no, we will employ, I think, a multitude of communication strategies that Sue's office will help us spread the word and keep these 200 people engaged as ambassadors.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. Nothing else on that issue. We will move along. Second reading public hearing on ordinance 72-18.
Accepting.
Oh, are we going to make a motion on that
I just thought that was part of the budget, but we're doing that individually?
On the committee,
To accept the report.
recommendations.
Seeing as how it was Christina's committee.
I'd like to move to accept the committee report.
I'll second that. Ann?
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Yes. And Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Ordinance 72-18, Ann?
Accepting the annexation of 12 acres, more or less, from Washington Township, Franklin County, to the city of Dublin.
Jennifer?
Good evening. There have been no changes since first reading. You'll recall that this property is within the proposed annexation area of the community plan and lies within Dublin's exclusive water and sewer service areas as designated by our agreements with the city of Columbus. So we would recommend approval of this ordinance tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from council? Hearing none. Ann?
Vice Mayor Amorose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ordinance 73-18.
Authorizing the provision of certain incentives to Ohio Health Corporation to induce it to lease or purchase a facility to retain and expand its non-clinical office and its associated non-clinical operations and workforce, all within the city, authorizing the execution of an economic development agreement.
Colleen?
Good evening. We do have some changes since first reading that I would like to point out. First of all, very good news. The current head count at Ohio Health is not 1,700, as was put in my memo. It's actually more than 2,000, so good news. That was an older number from 2017 that we had not updated yet, so they are 2,000 plus strong, which makes them a clear number 2 employer in the city. Since first reading, though, we have done some renegotiation. We have taken the proposal from $5.05 million down to $4.9. I can walk you through all those changes as they're redlined in the EDA if you'd like, but the majority of this change was done because we had front-loaded all of the job growth in year 1 mistakenly, and once we spread that out over the 4 years that they will need to actually add those jobs, it slightly changed the terms of the deal.
Does
And
anybody want her to go through all those detailed changes? Nope. Moving
Nope.
right along.
Okay. Well, we have Roland Tokarski with us tonight, Vice President of Real Estate Construction and Facilities, and Shauna Davis, who I think is probably just going to hide in the back of the room with Government Relations. But I'm going to invite Roland up to the podium, and he and I can answer any questions that you have this evening.
Welcome, Roland.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you guys are expanding here in Dublin.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Most importantly, we sincerely appreciate the partnership we've had with Dublin over many years. In fact, believe it or not, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary with Dublin Methodist Hospital this year, so hopefully we've been able to provide great health care to the community over those years. Our team's spread in a number of locations administratively throughout the community, so the approval of this incentive allows us to continue the pursuit of a building to be able to consolidate a lot of these functions right here in the community. So we're very excited about that here in Dublin. Frankly, if it weren't for your support, we couldn't do this. And one thing I want to point out is your staff has been excellent and diligent and very, very helpful as we've went through this to try to pull this deal together. And as I said, we're still in the pursuit of the building, so this is very helpful for us to move this. One thing I just want to mention is we are really proud to be a part of the community. We appreciate all you've done over the years, again, and we look forward to serving the needs of the community from a healthcare perspective for many years to come. So thank you again. We're glad to answer any questions you have and really appreciate it.
Thanks, Roland. Any questions from council? No? Seems like a win-win for everybody. As
Sure
they
does.
say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Mr.
Anybody else didn't have any, or do you have more, Colleen?
Nope, that's it.
Ann, let's see what happens.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Amorose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you, Roland. Appreciate you coming in. Ordinance 74-18, Ann?
This is adopting the annual operating budget for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2019. Need an introduction.
I'll introduce it. Angel.
Good evening, members of council. Tonight, the administration is pleased to introduce to you the 2019 operating budget. Our hope is that through this very high-level overview that we'll provide council a clear picture of our plan for 2019. We are going to first start with Dana reviewing his guidelines that he put together and gave to staff in preparation of the budget, and also how this budget supports the strategic focus areas of the city. Before I turn it over to Dana, as council's aware, we have changed up the format and how we're discussing the operating budget. To date, we have had 2 committee meetings, the Administrative Committee as well as the Community Development Committee, and they have reviewed their respective departments and divisions. Wednesday of this week, we have the Finance Committee and the Public Services Committee, and they will review the balance of the departments and divisions. We do have a Finance Committee of the Whole scheduled for next Wednesday, in which we will bring together all of the discussion points from the committee meetings and answer any outstanding questions that council members identified during those budget reviews. And our hope is that we are in a position on 2 weeks from tonight, on Monday, November 22nd, to have second reading and approval of the operating budget. So with that, I will first turn it over to Dana to discuss his focus areas and priorities.
Well, really, just a short comment here regarding this slide. This is the only slide I get, by the way, and then Angel gets the rest of them. But really just wanted to reference you to the memo that I put in your budget binder. It is the document that explains my letter of overview regarding this budget. It's addressed to you and the residents of Dublin. This document, I listed several key areas of emphasis and focused on the strategic focus areas that are listed up here. I think most of you are familiar with those 5 strategic focus areas. It's really what I believe and what staff believes to be the right direction for the city. It's based on both the implied and what I believe the specified direction of City Council that we believe we've heard over the course of the year, doing our best to try to address that. Additionally, this also involves the ear to the ground, if you will, with our residents and businesses that we hear. So we try to pull all that together and present to you this proposed budget in accordance with the city charter. So I'm happy to discuss this. I know that looked like a real laundry list of things under each of those strategic focus areas in that memo, but I think it really represents a work plan. It represents what are the key areas of emphasis under each of those areas and the things that we feel we have to execute on to continue to serve the public the way we do here in Dublin. I'm happy to discuss those. I look forward to discussing them with council and any aspects of those. I think we have a great start in this with the committee discussions that we've had to date. I want to thank you profusely for that opportunity to do that. I know we have a couple more to go this Wednesday, as Angel mentioned. I look forward to that ongoing discussion, of course, and then rolling all that back up into a council committee of the whole to discuss. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Angel. And like I said, I'm happy to discuss any of those areas of emphasis if you'd like. Thank you.
So to steal our city manager's, one of his favorite phrases, what is the bottom line up front? This 2019 budget has operating expenditures totaling $89.6 million, which represents a 3.2% increase over our 2018 operating budget, or nearly $2.8 million. We will highlight the variations amongst the different categories, being personnel, operating expenditures, and capital, in the upcoming slides. Well, we utilize fund accounting to track the activities of each fund that the city has. We generally report the operating budget in terms of operating revenues and expenditures. So when we say that, we are incorporating the revenues and expenditures of our general operating funds. That is the funds, all of our funds, with the exception of our enterprise funds, which are water and sewer funds, capital improvement funds, which includes all of our TIF funds, fiduciary funds, internal service funds, and our debt service funds. So simply put, it's the funds that account for our day-to-day activities of the city. And so you can see a listing up there of those funds that are included when we talk about operating revenues and operating expenditures. I've highlighted on this slide with an asterisk those funds that are subsidized by a general fund transfer. This chart, which is a little different from the one that you received in your packet, I apologize for that, shows that even going back to 2008, what usually happens is we come to council proposing a budget in which the operating expenditures are projected to exceed the operating revenues. In this case, for 2019, it is no different. Based on the operating revenues that we're projecting of $86.8 million and the operating expenditures of $89.6 million, that reflects a $2.8 million variance. And where this variance would come from would be largely the general fund balance or any of those other fund balances that I noted on the previous page. But what typically happens is even though we budget conservatively, both from a revenue standpoint and an expenditure standpoint, is that the actual variance becomes much smaller, or in most cases, our revenues actually exceed our expenditures. What this chart in front of you shows is going back to 2008, the blue bar representing the projected variance, which is a negative number at the beginning of each budget year, and then the red bar reflects the actual variance, and you can see with the exception of what we're projecting for 2018, and I'll explain why here momentarily, the expenditures have actually come in less than the projected variance in the projected revenue at year end. When we look at 2018 in particular, and actually beginning back in 2017, we have started to transfer money from our general fund to the capital improvement fund pursuant to our general fund balance policy. So that's based on our general fund balance at year end. Recall that our fund balance policy says that to the extent that our balance is in excess of 75%, we will transfer 25% of that amount in excess of 75% to the capital improvement tax fund. That is done so that we can be thoughtful about how we spend those extra dollars and ensure that they're not being spent on day-to-day operating expenditures, rather capital investment in the community. Also recall that in 2018, we made the purchase of the Delta building for the future City Hall. We utilized the general fund to pay for that purchase. So that, as we round out 2018, goes into contributing to our projected expenditures exceeding revenues. And then for 2019, again, we are expecting about a $2.8 million deficit. So first we'll take a look at our revenue. And as would not be a surprise to anybody, that our primary source of revenue is our income tax revenue, making up 82% of our total revenue sources within the operating budget. This in totality represents a 6.1% increase over what we had budgeted for 2018. Looking specifically at the income tax revenue, for 2018, we are projecting $85,400,000. As Council is aware, 75% of that gets credited to the general fund, making that total $64,050,000. And that is included in our operating revenues when we talk about operating revenues. And the other 25% is credited to the capital improvement tax fund. So going back to that initial slide where I outlined what is included in operating revenues and expenditures and what's not, our capital funds are not. So for the purposes of looking at that pie chart showing total revenue, this is just the general fund portion of our income tax revenue. So looking at how we came to that estimate, our 2017 actual income tax revenues were $87.5 million. At this time last year, we projected a 1.7% decrease over what ultimately became the 2017 actual income tax revenues. And we did that based on a number of factors. That 1.7% reduction was based on a reduction or the continued reduction and pullout of nationwide insurance from the city, an anticipated reduction at Wendy's. Last spring, they had made an announcement they were going to have headcount reduction at their corporate headquarters. But then on the offsetting side, we knew that we were going to have growth from United Healthcare moving into the city and growth in our existing tax base. But nonetheless, when we went into 2018, we budgeted a 1.7% reduction. I revised that estimate back in September based on our position to reflect a 1.2% reduction over 2017. So not a big tweak, but a tweak nonetheless. And that was based on better than expected income tax revenue collections. This slide has been updated since the version that you received in your packet a few weeks ago because we've closed out October. And through October, our income tax receipts are actually up 0.1% year to date over where we were last year. So what this tells us is that we are still conservative in our revenue estimates for 2018. Again, programming a 1.2% reduction, even though year to date we are 0.1% ahead of where we were last year. Our withholding revenue is up 1.5%, or a little over $900,000. Our net profits are down 7.6%, and our individual returns are down 2.9%. And looking forward to 2019, coincidentally, I am programming a 1.2% reduction. Again, this is based in large part on actual information that we have. I have excluded actual dollars that we received from Nationwide during 2018 because we know that they are no longer here within the city. Sticking with our conservative estimate, I have applied a 1% reduction in the remaining tax base that we have. And then finally, I've decreased our estimate by $1.5 million just to include an additional buffer or contingency. So this translates into $85,400,000 in projected income tax revenue for 2019. And that's what this budget is built around. The remaining 20 some percent of our operating revenue comes from a number of other sources, and that totals $22.7 million. The largest piece of that is really fines, licenses, permits, and charges for services. We have incorporated the fee schedule that Council approved a few weeks ago to reflect those cost of service studies and the increases that Council approved as part of that. Other notable revenue sources we have here are bed tax revenue, auto license and gas tax revenue, and intergovernmental revenues. Flipping to the expense side, again, this is similar to what you saw at the onset. So now I'm going to break it down into each one of those buckets: personnel, operating expenses, and capital. As a service organization, personnel costs make up the largest part of our expenditures, with salaries totaling $32.6 million in 2019. From a staffing standpoint, this budget has funding for 406 full-time employees, which is not an increase or a decrease over what was budgeted in 2018. However, there are a number of changes, some of which have already been discussed with the individual committees. Within the police department, there's proposing a new deputy chief of police position and 3 new corporal positions, and the promotion of those 4 individuals would come through a reduction of 4 police officers, so a net 0 increase or change within the police department. Within parks, there's removal of a public art and conservation contract specialist position, as well as the removal of a contract specialist, and then offsetting that is an addition of 1 landscape architect. Within planning, there is a request to reclassify 1 part-time code enforcement officer to full-time. And in terms of wage increases, we have 3 collective bargaining agreements, of which all of those contracts are negotiated for 2019. We do have one with United Steelworkers that will expire at the end of August of 2019, so we would expect to see some change in terms of the last quarter of the year, but funding has been included for each of those bargaining units pursuant to those contracts. For our non-union personnel, an overall budget of 2% has been applied. That does not mean that every employee gets 2%. It's based on our compensation plan.
Angel, if I may, I just want to make sure we're clear on the police officers. It's not a reduction in sworn officers. It's a reallocation, reclassification of certain officers to more of a supervisory role, which actually makes more efficiency and support on the streets. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Looking forward to benefits, that's the other side of the personnel equation. Our benefits program in 2019 is projected to cost $14.8 million, which is actually a 0.15% decrease over what we had programmed for 2018, roughly $23,000 reduction. And really the large reason for this is that, if you'll recall, in 2018, we included a $500,000 buffer to bolster up the fund balance within our self-insurance fund because the fund balance had gotten low. So that expenditure is no longer necessary. So our rates that we charge back to the departments for single coverage and family coverage is decreasing 11.7% and 6.7% respectively. Additionally, incorporated with our benefit costs are our required contributions to the retirement systems, both the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System and Ohio Police and Fire. Both of those are in accordance with our Ohio Revised Code. Looking to operating expenditures, this makes up $35.7 million of the 2019 operating budget. This represents a 4.7% increase over 2018, or about $1.6 million. And operating expenditures can really be broken down into 3 different buckets: contractual services, supplies, and other charges and expenditures. Our contractual services went up 9.1%, and what I've tried to do on each of these slides is highlight the big ticket items that make up the main variances from 2018 to 2019. So of that $1.5 million increase over last year, we have an additional $200,000 programmed for legal services, and that's largely related to right-of-way acquisition that we know we are going to have related to the Tuttle Crossing development. Within finance, we have budgeted about $408,000 additional for property taxes, and that's based on property that the city has purchased that was in the agricultural use category, and so when you purchase that and it comes out of what's referred to as the CAUV program, you have to pay a recoupment. So that accounts for that expenditure. Within IT, there's about $670,000 in additional budget needed for technology contracts. I will note, though, that is partially offset by a reduction in another category. Within economic development, there's about a $150,000 increase for advertising and other professional services related to the US 33 Smart Corridor, the debt contract, and the Metro Data Center contract. And then finally, within engineering, there's about $120,000 programmed for Ped Bridge lighting programming and operations, Bridge Street District parking management implementation, the France Road alternative transportation lane feasibility study, and the Bridge Street District travel demand model and land use update. These will all be discussed at the individual committee meetings if they have not been discussed already. Looking at supplies, this basically stayed the same as 2018. We had a slight increase of $12,000 over last year, and really you could look to the increase in salt prices, which went up about $264,000 over last year. We've incorporated that in this budget. Fortunately, it was offset by some of those IT contracts being reduced $406,000. I shouldn't say contracts, rather equipment maintenance costs. And then our fleet costs went up about $120,000 to account for higher fuel costs. Now, because the city does sell some of our fuel to other entities, we do recoup some of that increase in expenditures on the revenue side. And then finally, the other category within this segment is other charges and expenditures, which again stayed relatively flat compared to 2018. It went up about $64,000. Notable changes include economic development in the amount of about $226,000, and this is largely due to our economic development incentive budget going down. This is simply a function of those economic development agreements that we have active at the time. So as some roll off, others are rolling on. So we're just looking at commitments for the 2019 year. Again, we have included funding of $100,000 for the facade improvement program. Our solid waste contract, as council is aware, has increased approximately $116,000, so that cost has been absorbed within this budget. And then, as you just heard, there is funding in this budget for the Aging in Place program and Centero programming of about $77,500. Capital expenditures in this operating budget represent about $2.1 million. What's important to note is that this is separate from our CIP process. Certainly within your operating budget book that you receive, there's a capital portion that includes not only our capital improvement tax fund, but also all of our TIF funds. And those documents or those pages within the budget will have all of the budget that was approved for 2019 as part of the capital improvement program. But we do have a couple of other funds that fund capital improvements that are within the CIP. So, for example, in 2018, there were funds programmed for improvements to the Arts Council building. We charged the hotel motel tax fund for those as opposed to our capital improvement tax fund. So what you see here is really a reduction of expenditures for the Arts Council building that was in the budget for 2018 that are no longer needed in 2019. And then each department, for the most part, might have a couple of thousand here or there for capital equipment such as chairs or desk furniture, things like that are outside really the confines of the capital budget. But overall, our capital expenditures decreased 14.1% over the same time last year.
Hey, Angel?
Yes.
Before you go on, can I ask a question? You had mentioned I'm not asking you to go all the way back to the slides. One of the earlier slides that said for 2018, we didn't expect the variance to be positive, perhaps negative, because one of the large items was the purchase of the new City Hall building.
Correct.
Why is that not in the capital plan? Why would a building acquisition be in an operating? What fund would that have been?
Well, it came out of the general fund. The general fund is not restricted for paying for capital improvements. In fact, we have within our capital budget funding coming in from the general fund to help fund some of our water and sewer programs because those fund balances aren't enough. In the past, council has made a decision on a couple of projects, most notably the mid-century curb, gutter, and sidewalk program, to fund that using our general fund balance. Part of the evaluation as we're going through the capital budget is where is there funding to pay for something? Certainly, we would primarily look to the capital improvement tax fund, but in some cases, it's appropriate to use the general fund balance. If you recall, part of the 2019 through 2023 CIP has utilizing about $9 million for roadway improvements along Shire Rings Road and Eiderman Road. Because those will ultimately generate additional revenues, income tax revenues for the city, that is a very appropriate purpose to use the general fund balance for. By itself, the capital improvement tax fund could likely not afford that $9 million cost. So we balance that out looking at other available funds. There's no real right or wrong answer to that question, but certainly the general fund balance is an appropriate use for capital expenditures.
I just thought it was interesting when we're saying that's one of the reasons that we are, I want to say that, less favorable in a variance for what is a building fund.
Right, there's no restrictions on the general fund, and if you recall back to our capital discussions, when we looked at the end of that 5-year period, there was a couple $1 million variance. So if we were to have hit the capital improvement fund with a $4 million expense this year, that variance would have gone away, and actually we wouldn't have been able to do a number of the projects proposed as part of the 5-year CIP because that fund balance just couldn't afford it. Thank you. So again, as a recap, this operating budget calls for $89.6 million. If everything happens according to plan, which it never does, and usually what happens is what we present to you in terms of a general fund balance, we usually end up much more favorable than what we show on this chart. But based on our 2018 estimate, we would estimate our general fund balance to end at about 71%. And then based on the projected revenues and expenditures next year, with the general fund alone, we would expect it to be about 71%. So with that, I will answer any questions that council may have. And again, as we go through the committee structures or the committee meetings, departments and division heads are available to really get into the nuances of their own budgets.
Thank you, Angel. And so we have Mike's committee will meet as a whole on November 14th, a week from Wednesday.
Correct.
With the hopefully wrapping things up and bringing it back to council for a November 19th council meeting.
That is correct.
Does anybody have questions they'd like to ask in the meantime?
I just have one, and looking at it, for me, and maybe probably from a citizen standpoint too, the variance that you show is proposed operating revenues exceeding expenditures, or one of the slides had the variance. What I'd really like to see is a slide that has the actual expenditures, and then so that we can see, it's one thing to say that you have X amount of dollars proposed for expenditures, and you have this variance with the proposed revenue. But it would be nice to look back and see how much you actually spent based on what you proposed to have spent, and then the revenue that you had to cover it. Because without being able to look back to see if your expenditures were greater than your proposed expenditures, you don't really know how you manage that budget. So I don't see anywhere in the history of this where we can see, and I know 2018 isn't over, but it's kind of important to be able to go back and take a look at what we actually spent compared to what we proposed that we would have spent.
So the challenge to that is, and I think at this point everybody has sat in on one of the committee meetings, is that we have the original budget that council approved, then we have what's called the revised budget, and what that takes into account is any supplemental appropriations that have been done where we've come to council and amended the appropriations. It also takes into account any carryovers from prior years. So in order to get a revised budget number. So our actual amount would be measured against, we have no way of differentiating if an expenditure hit the original budget or hit a supplemental appropriation or hit a carryover purchase order. I mean, without literally walking through every single transaction in every single account. So it's not feasible to say how did actual expenditures measure against the budget, because you have a lot of other factors involved in that, namely carryover. We usually carry over a couple $1 million at year end into the next year based on just commitments that are in place that have not yet been liquidated or haven't been invoiced yet. So in order to get that exact comparison, we are not able to do that.
Well, I understand that, but I think I'm looking at it from the point where we may have some large expenditures, say on contractual services or whatever that might be. For council to determine whether or not we are spending more in an area than, because we don't line item. Say, for instance, we have a contract. We proposed that we would spend this much on the contract, but in the end, the contract costs 1.5 times that. There's no way to really determine whether or not your money is being spent in a way that's in the best method of spending it, whether or not you forecast it correctly. I mean, it's no different than you would do at home. Sometimes you say you're going to spend this much money on a home edition, and the home edition ends up costing you 1.5 times that. So I guess what I'm looking for is a way that we as council could really identify the areas that maybe we're overspending or we're not overspending, or that we're determining that we've proposed the right amount. And there's everybody has waste in any organization, right? So I would like a way to help us find the best ways to be able to determine where we might be able to be more efficient with the dollars.
So one thing that we can show, and Dana has requested this before and we've provided it, is what is our actual spend at the end of every given year as a percentage of the revised budget. What ultimately happens, first of all, let me say this, we can't end the year with any account being negative. So departments and divisions have the ability to transfer money, let's say from office supplies to office expense, or from contractual services to overtime. So essentially within each page of the budget, they have the latitude to transfer within that budget in order to execute what they need. We cannot end the year with any of those accounts being negative. So, and then bigger picture, we cannot end the year with any fund being negative. That is why we come to you at different points throughout the year. So in terms of overspending, I guess I would say that's not really feasible because we can't end in a negative position any year. But back to your point, what Dana has requested is what percent are we not spending each year? And what we've seen historically is that prior to the past couple of years, where we've really gotten down as close to a 0% operating increase as possible. I mean, we're always going to have those outliers. We're going to have the trash contract. We're going to have salt prices. We're going to have contractually agreed upon wage increases that are going to hit the budget. But strip those away, we've tried to get as close to a 0% budget. And so that gap is getting closer. But his point is, don't ask for $100,000 if you are routinely only spending 80% of that, or pick whatever the number is. So typically that has been less than 90%, but we are spending closer because our budgets have gotten tighter in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I would just chime in on that you know, what we're presenting here is a budget. And a budget is our best estimate on the activities that we conduct. Much of this budget, probably 80% of it, we know very well what it takes to provide policing, to provide rec programming, to provide. We've done it year over year. We continue to trim those through our efficiencies and things that we revisit, how those are delivered, how we staff, how do we fund it, how do we, you know, the material we bring to it. Some things we can't control, material costs and things like that. What I know going into developing this budget is we tend to turn in budget at the end of the year. We budget high, or we budget the best we can based on what we know. As Angel pointed out, we're not going to exceed those budgets. If we see ourselves, you know, approaching, you know, exceeding any budget line, we're going to take a hard look at that, and we're either going to bolster it up because that's a critical service. We're not going to cut back or we may take money away from something else during the course of the year that's not as important to make sure that that doesn't happen. But typically, we don't run into that situation. We do turn in budget at the end of the year that we don't spend. This is our best estimate on what it costs us to do that. We estimate relatively high, not artificially high or ridiculously high, but we do the best we can in estimating. And that's what a budget is. If you set a budget at your house, you're estimating what things might cost. You're not going to expend more than what it costs, I would hope. So to your point, I couldn't agree with you more. And we do turn in money at the end of the year. Even though we show a deficit in our revenues versus our expenditures, I would tend to bet we won't come in that way at the end of the year. Remember, this is a budget. It's our best estimate. We will check it as we go along. The Finance Committee, we issue you monthly reports as to our expenditures. The Finance Committee, all of you actually have access to that. You can take a look at that. It breaks it down pretty extensively into the different line items that you can take a look at. If you see us heading towards an expenditure that's fast or faster than you would have expected for some reason, you can call that out and ask us about it. But generally speaking, we're always operating well within that, and that we're not expending 100% of this proposed budget has been my experience. In fact, we were not expending it at a pretty high level, and frankly, what I've been doing since I've been city manager, because I knew that, I've asked department heads to not ask for more funds, but to make sure that we are kind of squeezing that margin down more and more by not asking for more dollars. But we're not trimming services. We're going to continue to provide the high-level services that we provide our residents that they have come to expect of us. Any additions to this budget, we are calling out in these budget review sessions that are net new and different. There's very few of those, except in the contractual services relative to studies. Other than that, we're delivering on what we've always delivered on. So, and like I said, we continue to try to squeeze that gap down.
So to that end, Dana, if at the end of the year you're giving back budget, you do have an estimate of what our actual versus proposed. You can answer the question I think that Jane is asking. We're on that. We're on that. I think it's one of the earlier slides where you have the actual projection. In the variant. I mean, to that end, if you're giving budget back, you do know what that number is.
I think
right?
if I'm answering, if I'm thinking of the same thing the way Councilmember Fox is thinking of it, I think we can answer that.
I do think so, too.
We'll make an attempt at answering that and see if that's the case.
I think so, too. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from them? Chris.
I have one additional question. Regarding the insurance and the decrease in the insurance premium, how long, so last year we made the $500,000 contribution, which gave us enough fund balance so that we could reduce the rates for this year. At what rate is that fund balance dropping, and how long into the future do you anticipate an additional $500,000 or other amount to be named later requirement? At what point in time?
Yeah, it's difficult to say because it's all a function of what our claims are because we're self-insured. As Homer briefed, and I can't remember if you were on that committee or not, but our claims have actually been holding steady when, nationally they're increasing at a rate, 10, 15% on average annual. So we're doing something right with our programs, our wellness program. The challenge we have is that our contribution to our wellness fund is made every 2 weeks when employees get paid. So that's when we charge the department. So what we found is that we didn't have enough at the beginning of the year. We didn't have enough fund balance to take care of all of the expenditures that were hitting at that point in time. So we really needed to bolster that up. Additionally, you can have things like just timing of stop-loss reimbursements. We could get hit at year-end with claims that maybe the next year we don't get reimbursed, or maybe they're high-dollar claims that don't quite hit that stop-loss reimbursement. So it's really just a function of what our experience is. One of the things that we did a couple of years ago is we actually bought down our rates. We didn't fund it at 100% level. And that was probably going back to 2012, 2013. I don't know if do it over again, we would do that, because maybe you keep it at 100% funding level, what you need to meet your projected claims and all of your expenditures, as opposed to artificially lowering it. So really, last year, I would say, was an anomaly. We were just trying to bolster it up so that we don't have to advance funds from the general fund. But I can't sit here today and say, do we expect to do that in the future? It is the first time since I've been here we have had to do that. Our goal is not to do that, certainly.
So part of my question is this: would we consider keeping the rates at where they previously were to pay ourselves back that $500,000? Because essentially we artificially lowered the cost of insurance by an upfront payment of $500,000. So
we could do that. That would not be my recommendation, given just given the unknown nature of health insurance costs and when we might get hit.
I just, if we do a decrease now, we think it's pretty safe that there's going to be an increase again next year, right? And we might be able to reduce that increase by 0.5%. We might be able to split it half and half. If we didn't do a decrease this year, which is pretty unheard of in insurance premiums for any individual to pay, if we held them steady and we banked that money into the $500,000 that we spent, then maybe next year, if there was a 1% increase, I'm making numbers up, I realize that, but maybe we'd only have to withhold from the employees 0.5% rather than to go a whole percent, which might affect them.
Well, we don't withhold.
There's no
employees do not
withholding,
pay
yeah.
a premium.
It's just tracking. I mean, basically, it's a function of claims.
Right.
We can't really predict that. We have good ideas. I mean, our TPA will help share that kind of information with us, but
Essentially, we withhold from ourselves.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
we
It
pay-
would just
to
either.
pay the claims.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
I understand where you're headed with that. That's a great question. You could artificially hold that up against yourself and build the fund as you suggest. I think in our case, what we're saying here is let's pay it where it's at. We're also going to buy stop loss. We've briefed that as well the other day. I think you have the wherewithal to bolster the fund if you get into that situation, and you've got the flexibility to do that. So withholding from yourself at the expense of other things, it's kind of a 6 to 1 or half dozen the other. We could do what makes you most feel comfortable, and yeah, I mean, but I think either way, you're in a position to be able to bolster that now or bolster it later. But it's a great question. I can understand why you might want to pay into it over time as opposed to taking a big hit at one time. So
that may we provide a little additional cushion. I'm not saying that we don't do anything or we negatively impact the balance of the city, but a reduction in anything relative to health care right now seems counterintuitive.
it does. I was at a board meeting today where they said that their health increases are going up 16% next year. So I'm like, thank you. I'm glad we are where we are.
Well, the Healthy by Choice piece has really made a huge difference in the fact that we're self-funded and managed it with the Healthy by Choice program is made a huge difference.
I'm not disputing any of that.
No, I know you.
I'm only saying, rather than having to come back and need an additional $500,000 in another year when our budget may be tighter, to not do a reduction.
I think it's a great point. I think it's certainly something you could choose to do where you just want to say, look, whether you're back charging yourself or just partially charging yourself and increasing it and building the fund, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's it's shoring it up. I think it's a good point. If that's something you want us to take a look at as council, we'll certainly take a look at that and can propose that back.
We can bring back the cost if we left our rates for single and family coverage the same as what we had this year, and then council can go from there as far as making a decision.
Any other questions or comments?
I would like to add, if on that topic, if you don't mind, on the benefits, we did a real peel the onion apart, if you will, on that program. I think it was 2 years ago. Councilmember Keenan, I was just sidebarring with him, trying to remember. It was 2 years ago. That's probably something you should do every 3 years, maybe, or two years, or into your third cycle. So it's something you might want to consider as Finance Committee or Council as a whole to really take a hard look at that program and ask yourself all those hard questions about it and its future. So I welcome that discussion.
Jane, you have something?
Yeah, just one question and comment. Many organizations, and I think some government organizations do this, in order to find efficiencies and waste in government, they actually either incentivize or allow their staff workers to make suggestions on cost-cutting measures. Do we have a program like that?
Well, actually, the way we formulate our budget bottom up, we really rely on division heads, department heads to review their budget and bring it forward to me. I give just general guidance on what it is I'm willing to accept, what it is I'm willing to take to council, and what I'm willing not to. But I've never told any of our staff, don't bring something forward. I've asked them to make me aware, and certainly they can express that to you as well if there's something that we're not fulfilling that we think we need. But of course, at the end of the day, that all gets balanced against available resources.
Right.
So,
I guess
but we do encourage the input of our staff members on what they need, be it equipment, be it programming ideas. Also, certainly looking at our processes. We've mentioned PieWorks and our innovation program that we have. That's open to anybody and everybody who wants to get trained in that, and we make that available and invite them into the training. They don't even have to be trained to participate, but we often bring in employees and revisit our programs and our processes.
Right. I think I'm more thinking of when I think of the aging in place and how residents came along with ideas that one wouldn't have expected. I'm thinking of the guys on the ground, of the people on the ground that maybe that drive the salt trucks who might be able to tell you ways to save salt. I'm thinking of just the everyday person that's out there working in the cemetery that tells you how you can save costs in the cemetery.
I don't know what you're hearing, but we do invite people in to do that, and we do have team meetings and so forth. I would welcome any of these department division heads to talk about how they facilitate those processes and involve them. Now, whether people choose to participate or not is another story, but we certainly encourage that.
Well, some places have, even the cost-saving drop box, or I'm just saying that there are many ways that we can.
We just did an idea starter program like that, where we had I kind of laughed at it myself, but even the old guy who doesn't leverage technology, I'm accused of a lot, but I do. But we had the old-fashioned drop the idea in the box and came up with a list of great idea starters, we call them, for our innovation team to take a look at.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on.
I have one quick item.
Go ahead, Mike.
You mentioned the CAUV recoupment and how that impacted the budget. So it's my recollection that you don't have to have a CAUV recoupment on parkland. I'm sure you guys are probably on that. Is anybody aware of that? If you buy ground and it's for park purposes?
Right. If we're still going to maintain it for park purposes or just general city purposes, we're exempt from paying property taxes.
No, but not property, but the recoupment.
But the recoupment?
Yeah.
So if you are keeping it in a park status, you do not have to pay that.
Maybe if you're buying a piece of ground and we're turning it into a park status like Riverside Drive, I do know that because I testified in front of the legislature years ago when Homestead Park was done, and we were able to change the law because we got a big bill when we bought the ground out there for that park.
Matt Stifler's our property guru.
Yeah, these properties that we're talking about, the CA recoupment on, we're not turning into parkland. But when we buy property and hold it, we continue to farm it, and we don't pay a recoupment fee in that situation. Or if we were to buy it and turn it into parkland, we wouldn't pay the recoupment fee. But that's not the situation.
I was thinking about Riverside Drive in particular. I guess maybe we had a lot of that right away already, or maybe it was already in. Was there ground acquisition over there that will be part of the park down along the river where we're going to have canoe and kayaking and?
I did those deals personally. There were cases where we paid recoupment on that because it was intended to be put into to be used for some of that right of way. When we shifted it, was going to be right of way as it is. Some of that was put into, depend on the residuals, were put into use for business. So there were some recoupments paid on that. In areas where it became green space, we avoid the other costs because it was turned into.
I'd just ask you to review it, that's all, because I'm pretty sure that's an accurate statement. That
it is accurate. We keep an eye on that.
Anything else, Mike? Okay, so the two important dates then with the budget itself are the November 14th committee meeting of the whole and November 19th, the next council meeting. So we are going to move on. Ann, I'm going to pull an audible. I see that the prices are here, and they are here for the Historic District Facade Improvement Grant recommendation from the Community Development Committee, which is run by John. So I'm going to go ahead and move that committee report up to the next item on the agenda so we can address that so they can get on their way. If that's okay. John, I cleared that with John, and he said that was okay with him, so John.
So the committee met on October 31st. We had one applicant. It was 24 South High Street. Staff, as did the committee, Kathy and Chris and myself, felt the application met the intent of the committee facade program. This project will allow the building owner to make further renovations to the second story, thereby creating a desirable office space. The reason they considered this a facade is this building had a sloping roof, and it was an important part of that front elevation. So the committee is asking you to approve this request.
Is that a motion, John?
That is a motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ken?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Okay. There you go. Thank you for coming in.
Look forward to seeing the approval.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, ordinance 75-18, Ann?
Amending various sections of Ordinance 1517, which is a compensation plan for non-union personnel.
I'll introduce it. Homer.
Good evening, members of council. The amendment is a companion legislation to the operating budget and proposes to modify the compensation plan for non-union personnel. It will accomplish the following if approved. First, it creates a deputy chief of police position in support of the recommendation from the chief of police in the 2019 operating budget proposal. The chief will cover this proposal more in his presentation to the Public Services Committee meeting on Wednesday evening. Next, it proposes the creation of a new pay band 2.2 in the pay table to accommodate the creation of the deputy chief position. And this will in turn cause us to change the numbering of the pay bands for the department director positions from pay band 2.0 to 2.1 to be consistent with the remainder of the table. It then updates some titles of the divisions and associated directors. The Division of Volunteer Resources would become the Division of Outreach and Engagement, and the Division of Criminal Justice would become the Division of Court Services. Then it reclassifies the current landscape architect to a landscape manager and combines a contract specialist and the public arts specialist into a new lower graded landscape architect position in support of the request from the Director of Parks and Recreation in the operating budget. And he also will discuss this proposal more during Wednesday's Public Services Committee meeting. The remainder of the proposed changes update and clarify various sections to include the awarding of compensatory time versus paid holidays, eligibility for longevity pay, short-term disability limits, repayment of tuition reimbursement, double time eligibility, and the on-duty status. Staff recommends approval of Ordinance 7518, amending the Ordinance 1517, the compensation plan for non-union personnel at the second reading on November 19th. I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Hearing none? All right, we'll see you back on November 19th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ordinance 76-18, Ann?
Accepting the updated estimated average per acre value of land for park fees in lieu of land dedication.
I'll introduce it. Matthew.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Before you tonight is an updated appraisal for raw land per acre for your consideration. By city ordinance, this value is updated every 2 years and provides the basis for which land fees are collected in lieu of land dedication for development. The Horner Appraisal Group completed the analysis within the Dublin area and is recommending an average price increase of $5,000 per acre, from $60,000 currently to $65,000 per acre. This fee will be applied in January of 2019, will remain in effect for the next 2-year cycle. So staff is recommending approval, but we will be bringing this back to you November 19th for the second reading. But I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chris?
I have a couple questions. So, as I read through this, the comparables that they would draw would be primary residential single-family homes. And I'm trying to figure out why we would use that designation to come up with our Parkland Acquisition Fund number, because we really, that's not the parkland we're buying anymore. Most of our housing developments are built out largely. And at the $62,500 or $62,000 or $65,000 per acre number, the parks that we're buying, we're not able to acquire for $65,000, the parkland that we're buying. So I guess my question is, why are we using that comparable to come up with this amount?
I think historically that's the way it's always been worded in the ordinance itself. I would suppose that could change based on council's recommendation.
Well, and I see that many of the comps that they use are outside of the city, in areas that don't seem very comparable to what what's happening within the city of Dublin. So I guess I was really disappointed to look at what they were using for comps, and I guess I would like to know the last 5 parkland acquisition projects that we did. What did we pay an acre? To me, that's a comparable number. The fee in lieu that we're primarily getting is in our more dense, more urban areas where the price per square foot, frankly, is quite a bit greater. We're paying, in some instances, $100,000 more an acre than what we're collecting. So every time we're doing fee in lieu, we're losing money, and a lot of it. I don't think we should. But
well, I'd make a comment that if we have a price that's so low, and I see this in planning and zoning, they're always asking for fee in lieu of. It's just easier not to give us the green space.
Sure. Why wouldn't you give away $65,000 when you can keep something that's worth $165,000?
Right. So personally, I think the price isn't. I agree with you. It's not representative of what we pay for parkland. And secondly, it's a disincentive to create green space within the developments that are coming before us.
We'd love to raise that fee, so we'll happily take this back and reassess it. We also will look at the ordinance, the original ordinance, to make sure that we're not going askew with that. So let us take a hard look at that, and we'll report back to you on it.
And these folks came up with, it was a long report. I'm guessing it was close to 80 pages that I read. I don't think we need to go back to them. I think if we look at historical data, what are we paying for parkland?
I think let us look into that from a legal perspective, only because when you have to set land against appraisals, unless you're looking at, and we just went through this, if you're looking at land that's already for sale and on the market, sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's not. But I hear you.
I guess I'm saying I don't need another 80 pages.
Yeah, well, that's your typical appraisal report, is at least that. But I don't disagree with you. Let us go back and take a look at it through that lens. And
you could ask the appraiser maybe to look at the last sales, as she suggested, the last 5 or 10 acquisitions that we had, and use those as comparables and put that into the report. They should be. There's historical data on it. That's what they need.
And that's what we're buying.
Yeah. As long as that's parkland. The most of our recent acquisitions have been commercial property for commercial purposes, so we'll reach back. It's been a while, I think, since we bought some of that.
Well, we would have had all of Bridge Street, all of the Riverside Drive, all of those easements and acquisitions.
Yeah, I think that's a little different animal than what I would. I guess just for clarity's sake, I think we would want to look at situations like where we purchased land for Emerald Fields, land we purchased for Darty Fields, Avery Park's probably too far back. We did we do a recent purchase for Kaufman Park? We didn't do anything fairly recently with Kaufman. Well, I tell you what, we don't want to look at Kaufman because that's off the charts, even in 1990s dollars. But I understand the point.
We have the new mounds.
Right. Yeah, that's a great.
We have Ferris Holder Wright property.
That's a great example.
So can you bring that back at the next
we can do that.
council
Sure.
meeting? All right. We'll see you back on November 19th on that. Ordinance 77-18, Ann?
Amending figure 153.061A to address street connections based on recent developments within the Bridge Street District and analysis of the district transportation plan.
All I'll introduce it. Logan.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. This amendment is for revisions to the Bridge Street District Street Network map to reflect recent development patterns and envisioned road connections within the Bridge Street District itself. The street network map for the Bridge Street District designates roadway classifications for existing and proposed streets to support the mixed-use development patterns. Shown on the screen is the existing network map that's located in our zoning code. The primary purpose of this amendment is two-part. The first is to update the street network map to reflect as-built conditions based off of the recent development proposals we've had. The second is to remove a section of Rockcrest Parkway extending from the terminus in historic Dublin to the future extension of Shawan Falls Drive to the west. Highlighted on the screen in blue are the areas of the map that are being amended to reflect the as-built conditions of roadway alignments, and these are based off of development proposals such as Bridge Park and Tuller Flats. Highlighted in black are the portions of the network being removed entirely, such as a neighborhood street that was going through the Penn Zones campus, as well as that extension of Rockcrest Parkway. Those amendments are reflected on this map shown on the screen, as well as identified in your packet as Exhibit A. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of these amendments at their October 11th meeting, and staff is recommending approval of this ordinance at the second reading on November 19th. Happy to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Logan, I have a question. In the packet, in the digital packet that we received, could you back up to the black line with the blue circles? Okay.
Yes.
That is page 615 in our packet. When you go to page 616, this section through the North Fork at Indian Run, it reappears.
I believe the way that the packet was created, the Exhibit A, which would have been the first one you come to, so page 614, that's the proposed one that's part of this ordinance. The second, the middle page, is the marked up version, and the last page is what actually exists in code today. So it goes backwards from how I have it in the presentation. It actually goes from the first map you see is the proposed, the last one is existing. Okay. This presentation that's flipped. I started with the existing and then went to the proposed.
Because none of them are dated or labeled.
That's something we can definitely do for the second reading to make that clear.
That would be really helpful, so we would know exactly what map we're voting on.
Yes, that is no problem at all.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one. It says on here on the Bridge Street District Network, Figure A, I think it's proposed, that alleys and service streets are not depicted.
Correct.
And the reason I'm asking that question is I think they should be depicted, and I'm wondering why they're not. And the reason I think they should be depicted is because when planning and zoning is looking at lots and blocks, and when council is looking at lots and blocks, it would be very helpful to understand where planning would have put alleys, because apparently they are proposed in here somewhere, alleys or service streets, so that we can consider those when development projects come before us to try to break up some of these large blocks that we have. So is there a reason that we don't depict them?
I think the main reason that it's not depicted is the purpose of this street network map is to show the public streets that would be constructed as development builds out in the Bridge Street District. So that's part of a transportation model that was developed when the whole Bridge Street District was established and how those connections would happen. I think one of the reasons they were left off for that is because those can vary so much depending on the type of mixed-use development, depending on the layout, depending on the location, the number of blocks that would be created as part of that. Those service streets are even more subject to change than the public street network that we want to establish in that grid pattern we want. I think the other part is that we want to allow a little bit more flexibility for development proposals to not depict that this is the only location that a service road could be connected to. I think we want to allow that flexibility that we can work with the development as it comes in to determine, is it an appropriate connection or is it not an appropriate connection?
Well, the reason I ask it is because we don't really have any alleys or service streets in any of the Bridge Park development. And when you don't depict them, it appears as if they're not something that you should consider. So not understanding where or if alleys and service streets should be used and when they should be used, then they're just never used. So I think that's where I feel as if at least some opportunity to see where they could be considered to be used. I mean, because they're not there, then we never ask for them. So I would like a little bit, I guess what I'm asking for is a little better understanding on how and where alleys and service streets can be incorporated into development plans if they're not, because there's no way to refer to it. You know, unless you see this little fine print, you'd say, well, they're not allowed, right? So I need more understanding on that. When you have large blocks and you get a big building that takes over the entire block, and you can't service it because you don't know where or where alleys and service streets can be incorporated into it, then a developer comes without them.
Yeah,
and so, you know, see what I'm saying?
Giving you the funny eyeball. Just
yeah, I'm looking at you because I know you are.
I'm wondering if we can we approach that in some way with language as opposed to lines on a map to ensure that the intent to make sure those things are considered and accounted for as a
I think it's really important. There's no understanding from my, I speak for myself, but I've in experience on planning and zoning. There is no understanding as to what we can require on alleys and service streets within a development because there's no conversation about it here and there's no depiction of it. So
I understand where you want to get
to. So the only existing alleyways and service streets we have would be in historic Dublin at present. Is that correct?
Well, they're called lanes,
sort of.
But
they're called what?
Aren't they called lanes? But we'll call them alleys.
They serve as alleys, maybe.
Yes, they do.
I think what Jane's referring to is our larger issue that we need to deal with. And maybe the map is the right place, maybe it isn't the right place, of planning for service in our more urban areas. And just a way to do that. Maybe some notes on a map might be helpful, and then maybe language in some other areas that there is an implementation of service drives, service ways, alleys, things of that nature.
And if I may, that's something that may be addressed in the Bridge Street District's design guidelines that are being worked upon as part of that future code amendment to the Bridge Street District. So pulling out components that we can address in the guidelines, and that's something that we could definitely take a look at. And incorporating in more detail is how do you include service drives, promote those with the types of development. I think what we've seen is almost an alternative where the developers have taken those, what could be service roads, and actually made them public streets. So it's a very different way of looking at it and then filling in those spaces in between with open space and pedestrian realms like that. So that's something that could be incorporated in the design.
We do. We need some, especially planning and zoning, we need some conversation around these connections and the service and alley business,
Absolutely. But we can provide something for the next meeting as well, just a little bit of history on that.
Okay. Anything else on this piece of legislation? Okay. I guess, Logan, you're going nowhere because we're going to talk about Ordinance 78-18.
That is correct.
I will introduce that as well after you read the title.
Amending the thoroughfare plan map and the community plan to address street connections based on recent developments within the Bridge Street District and analysis of the district transportation plan. Since
you're standing there, Logan, go.
Yes, so good evening. This is a continuation on the amendments that were proposed in Ordinance 77-18. The thoroughfare plan itself is a community-wide map that classifies and identifies roadways throughout the city along with their planned improvements and extensions. The amendments proposed within this ordinance fall within the Bridge Street District, which is outlined in black on the screen. The amendment includes two major changes to the thoroughfare plan. The first is the removal of the portion of Rockcrest Parkway, which is highlighted in yellow, and the second is to update the street network map itself to reflect the as-built conditions. Both of those have been updated with the map that is shown on the screen and was included in your materials. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommended approval of these amendments at their September 20th meeting, and staff is recommending approval of these at the second reading on November 19th. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from council?
Just one. My understanding in reading through some of this is that there is still some hanging out there of the possibility that there will be a connection, a west connection from the Rockcrest terminus now to eventually to Post Road. And I want to be perfectly clear and understand that is not a proposal that council or that we are entertaining. In other words, I want to be assured that there will be no roadway along the Indian Run Ravine either now, in 5 years, or 20 years.
And I want to hear from the rest of the
Right.
council on that, not that we don't.
That's how
we
I.
certainly
it's
agree
just
with that.
A mild comment of my opinion.
One thing you can't do is handcuff future councils.
I'm not trying to do that, but I want to
20
make
years
sure.
is a long time.
Well, that's a pretty old ravine.
I understand.
Yeah, no, I
Hopefully
guess what
you-
I'm saying is, I saw language in there somewhere that said that this is still sort of out there as a possibility, so as a place, keeping it in place. And I can tell you that picks and axes and residents will just go crazy if this isn't off the table and really off the table. Is it off the table?
I don't think the intent was to ever indicate that there would be an extension of this that would go over the Indian Run. There may be, in a future model, an extension of that down the road. However, that's not planned for as of right now, and this ordinance only shows what exists for Rockcrest Parkway today.
We had made the mistake a while back of showing what really was a shared use path intended, and somehow that got legs as a road. And boy, did we ever regret that, even showing a shared use path. So
Right.
we're trying to clean that up.
Okay,
and,
that's good,
and
because
pull that out.
I'm going to get a lot of phone calls in the morning.
That's the whole intent of this.
Yeah, and emails. And I just want to make that clear that we're clear.
I think some of the confusion was the website wasn't, or the map on the web wasn't updated, and it appeared to remain after the discussion happened.
And it had been officially adopted, and it was a.
Anything else from council on that? Okay, thanks, Logan. Appreciate
Thank you.
it. Ordinance 79-18, Ann.
Authorizing the city manager to execute and accept a 0.289 acre perpetual public utility shared use path easement from the Board of Education of the Dublin School District from the property located at 4295 Bright Road for the public purpose of constructing a new cul-de-sac, constructing sanitary sewer lines and water line extensions, and a shared use path.
I'll introduce it. Megan.
Good evening, members of council. The sanitary sewer and water line extensions to Area 4 and Bright Road cul-de-sac project and a planned shared use path connecting the proposed elementary school and Macbeth requires the acquisition of property interest from several property owners, including the Dublin City Schools. Dublin City Schools are required to construct and dedicate an easement for a shared use path along Bright Road frontage in connection with the development of this parcel at its own expense. We mutually agreed on the acquisition of the utility easement for the appraised value, and the school board approved this transaction at their last meeting. Excuse me. Staff recommends adoption of this ordinance at the second reading on November 19th, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Questions from council? Hearing none, we will see you back on November 19th. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Ordinance 80-18, Ann.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a settlement agreement to acquire 0.1270 acre fee simple right-of-way, 0.9139 acre fee simple right-of-way, and a 0.6520 acre permanent utility easement, a 0.0953 acre temporary construction easement from Kevin G. Bennington, Mark A. Bryant, Larry D. Clark, and Mark A. Palmer, successor co-trustees of the Durock Trust, located at the southeast corner of State Route 161 and Cosgray Road, a 0.0299 acre temporary construction easement from the same property owner located on Plain City Road, and a 0.0232 acre temporary construction easement from the same property owner located at 7520 Plain City Road for the public purpose of constructing roadway improvements.
I'll introduce it.
Members of council, the improvement project to construct a roundabout at the intersection of State Route 161 and Post Road and Cosgray Road requires the city acquire property interest from 3 parcels owned by the Durock Trust. 2 of those parcels are located along the north side of 161 west of Cosgray Road, and then the 3rd parcel is located at the southeast corner of 161 and Cosgray. The city, with input and agreement from the Union County Engineer's Office, participated in good faith discussions with the owners and have come to mutually agreeable terms for the acquisition of the property interest as detailed in the staff report. Staff recommends adoption of the ordinance at the second reading and public hearing on November 19th. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from council?
Is that part of the corner that's actually in the city? Will we receive reimbursement from our partners on that piece, or is that all on us?
No, Union County is responsible for the entire cost of the acquisitions.
So we'll receive full reimbursement?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Paul. We'll see
You're
you
welcome.
back at the next meeting. I make a motion to waive council rules of order to address ordinances numbers 81-18 through 85-18 together. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Ann?
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Bosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Aludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Ordinance 8118 is from the Edwards Avery Road LLC, located at 5300 Avery Road. Ordinance 8218 is from Edmund L. and Donna K. Crone, 5508 Kara Court. 8318 is Larry Kincaid, located at 5509 Kara Court. 8418 is Matthew B. Brown, located at 6228 Rings Road. And 8518 is property from J. Larry Fluck.
I'll introduce it. Paul?
In a similar fashion, the Tuttle Crossing Boulevard extension in the Avery Road Improvement Project requires the acquisition of property interests from multiple property owners on Tuttle Crossing Boulevard, Avery Road, Wilcox Road, Rings Road, Kara Road, and Kara Court. The 5 parcels in as part of this ordinance, or these 5 ordinances this evening, there's 2 properties located on Kara Court, 1 property along the east side of Avery Road, which is the Edwards Avery LLC property. The 2 I previously mentioned were Kincaid and Crone. The Brown property is located along the north side of Rings Road, west of Avery Road, and then a rather peculiar piece of property owned by the Fleck individuals is actually in the intersection of Avery Road and Kara Road, which was kind of a residual parcel that was identified during the survey work that we have to go ahead and acquire. The city, through its acquisition agent, has come to mutually agreeable terms with these multiple property owners in connection with the project, and as detailed in the staff report. Staff recommends adoption of this ordinance at the second reading and public hearing on November 19th. Be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Questions from council?
Paul, about how many more do you have?
Several. We'll be doing this for a while, so.
So that guy's property is entirely in the intersection?
Yes.
That's location. Okay.
Oddly enough, not a high value, $300.
Not.
So it's really converting to PRO.
Yeah.
Troll out there.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. In looking at this, and I knew it was coming, but we've got a tunnel there, right? And we were all talking about not building any more tunnels. And I'm curious, and we've got 2 intersections and a tunnel only in one. So what's the reasoning behind this particular spot for a tunnel, and why not the other? And can we not be pedestrian friendly without an underground tunnel?
Yeah, and I'd be glad to give you more information on that. That question's been asked before, and we provided more detailed information. The short answer is we did evaluate at the Avery Road, Rings Road, Kara Road intersection. It really required more extensive property acquisition to accommodate a tunnel at that location. And really in the final evaluation, that the Tuttle Crossing Boulevard extension intersection with Avery was a better location to separate out those pedestrian movements from the vehicular movements themselves.
But I mean, you have pedestrian access. I mean, you cross the street. I mean, there's pedestrian access there. Why both pedestrian access and a tunnel?
Yeah, and it's also tied to the federal funding that's associated with the project itself.
That's the key driver that we had mentioned before, was the federal funding involved in this. If not for federal funding, there probably would not be a tunnel.
Oh, so the feds like the tunnels. So it's the federal government that wants the tunnel. Is that what you're saying?
It's tied to federal dollars, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. There's our taxpayer dollars at waste.
Any other questions from council? Okay, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Ordinance 86-18.
Authorizing the city manager to execute a real estate purchase agreement and the necessary conveyance documentation to acquire a 4.215 acre more or less fee simple interest from Thomas Family LP.
I'll introduce it. Donna.
Good evening, members of council. To provide you a little bit of background, I'd like to start with the development of the Emerald Parkway, which began in the early 1980s to establish a strong east-west vehicular connection and create opportunity for an economic corridor. And with the final extension of Emerald 8, approximately 115 acres of city-controlled land with high visibility on Interstate 270 became available for development. As per Council's direction, staff has pursued and requests authorization to proceed with the acquisition of property located at the northeast corner of Emerald Parkway and Riverside Drive, and you'll see that outlined in red on the map. The subject property consists of approximately 4.2155 acres. The total purchase price for the property is $632,250, or approximately $150,000 per acre. This land valuation is consistent with current market values in the Dublin area. Due to the adjacency of the city-owned parcel to the west, which is outlined here in green, the opportunity exists to preserve the wooded acreage along Riverside Drive, to combine parcels fronting Emerald Parkway to maximize developable acreage, protect the boundaries of Ferris Wright Park, and also provide a wooded buffer to the Grandy Cliffs neighborhood, which is located on the west. Funds to acquire the parcel will come from the city's general fund balance, and this request will be incorporated with upcoming legislation to amend the 2018 appropriations. And with that, we seek your authorization to proceed with acquisition for economic and municipal purposes, and we'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Don. Any questions from council?
Does this include the cave area? I could see the creek sort of by the way the trees are on your map. It's a little hard to decipher it all.
I am pretty sure that this goes into at least the center line of that ravine on the north edge. I don't think we can get you a closer view of that, Councilmember Reiner, before your next meeting. I don't think it goes all the way across the ravine, no.
Yeah, this shows you a little bit. This is a view looking east. It shows you a little bit better the parcel, but to get really zoomed in there from an aerial standpoint, we don't have those photographs available.
I think it is, John.
Yeah, I mean,
who's the guy on the East Side Civic Association who would take everybody over there? Randy Roth, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's got a creek running down the middle of it, and I just wondering are we acquiring the creek? It's really the prettiest part of the.
I'm pretty sure this goes to the center line of that, but let me get a little bit more.
And then there's a tunnel that goes under the road, which would allow access on dry days that allow people to actually go from both sides to connect the two parkways. There's an existing old tunnel, and it comes out at the creek. It's actually used for that creek that goes underneath.
I will not encourage that crossing, but you're correct.
Keywords on dry days, John.
Yeah, on a dry day.
So it's a wonderful hike because you can actually come up out of the other park and then pop up and then go up into the area where the caves existed.
No, seriously though, I know that there's familiarity with that, and you can cross underneath that, and it's a very cool place to check out. But I'll get you some more details.
I'm just curious if we acquire the more aesthetic part of the parcel.
Yeah.
And we should try to.
Where does ownership lie on the parcel to the north?
Well, that's what I'm suggesting is if it, I can't tell though if that's in the middle of the creek or not. I'm pretty sure that the center line is in the creek. So the parcel to the north belongs to Mr. McDowell.
Right.
Let me drill down on that from an aerial perspective and nail that down for you.
Traditionally, that's how it would go. Between two farms, they'd run right down the middle of the creek.
It'd be nice to preserve the water runway and the creek bed, really, and have that as a permanent part of the park.
Would that be part of the right-of-way rules in Ohio when you have a waterway where you go to the center line?
I actually think if that property to the north were to ever develop as something, there's significant challenges there. One is there's still remnants of Indian mounds on part of that. Given your own requirements for green space dedication, in addition to that, I think it's pretty safe to say you would probably garner the other side of that riparian corridor if there was a development on that other side. And I think in some of our discussions, we've pretty much come to the conclusion that parcel to the north is one that would require
and under any scenario, if it were to develop, a lot of challenges because of those types of things that are associated with that property.
Why the general fund and not parkland fund?
Because if it's utilized for economic development purposes, parkland acquisition would not be appropriate.
So the plan at this point, potentially some of it could be parkland and some of it couldn't, so that for that reason. Correct.
Yeah, we've contemplated off and on over the years the idea of developing that particular parcel. Access to that parcel has been difficult over the years as well from Emerald Parkway. By the time, if you were to put an entrance off of Emerald Parkway onto that parcel, you would significantly reduce its developability because of the way you'd have to lay out or lay back the hillside to get to it. So we've often contemplated maybe even joint or shared parking between the park and a future development there, if that would happen. We know, we've heard very loud and clear what the East Side Civic Association is willing to consider there as well, so that will be taken under consideration as we look to any opportunities that might present themselves to develop that.
Dan, have we done any calculation on what their parkland contribution would be, what the requirement would be on this parcel, and is it enough to get the creek donated, or at least half of it?
On the purchase that we're proposing on the land we're proposing to purchase, I think you'll find a lot of the parkland dedication will be dedicated to whatever portion of that riparian corridor or that is, as well as the trees that are on that. It's kind of hard to tell from this view, but it's a pretty steep incline from Riverside Drive up to the parcel. It sits kind of perched up high. So when you look at all that wooded area there on that acreage, as well as the stream corridor itself, that would be a significant contribution. Or now that the city owns it, if the city were to own it, I should say, we would obviously want to protect those areas ourselves if we were to allow development to come onto that site.
Do you have archaeological challenges on that parcel?
There have been environmentals done before on that. As far as the archaeological, I'm not sure. We'd probably have to check that. I don't think we had those issues, did we, Matt, on this side of the river when we developed the park? Right, but we didn't have any significant issues that we found along Emerald Parkway, as I recall. Not to say we couldn't on this, but not that we're aware of.
I think OSU already excavated 6 skulls out of the one pit that was there on the parcel that we're looking at purchasing right now, years and years ago. And then in the cave that goes back there, they found a humongous rattlesnake skin that was just colossal.
I forwarded Matt an article.
And this happened, oh my God, 20, 30 years ago.
Oh, it was much longer than that. I forwarded Matt the article that was about 50 years old. The most interesting contribution that this had to the Historical Society was the use of dogs. And it was a big article and talked about how these were some of the first agrarian folks to use service dogs and sacrifice of dogs. And it really, we should send that article out because it was really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Thank you.
Council, I have an update. In looking at the lot lines, the creek actually falls into the lot in the north, which is owned by the McDowell property. So that would not be part of this acquisition.
Okay. Well, we'll see you back on November 19th on that. Resolution 65-18.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into a service agreement with Washington Township for snow and ice removal services for the Amlin alleys.
I'll introduce it. Megan.
Good evening again. In 2015, Washington Township transitioned to a contracted services-based model for services on township roadways and entered into an agreement with Dublin to provide snow removal services at the locations referred to as the Amlin Alleys off of Rings Road. And the city has been providing those services since that time to the township. That agreement has expired, and Dublin and Washington Township staff have collaborated on a new service agreement whereby Dublin will continue to perform those snow and ice removal services for those 0.5 lane miles of alleys. These alleys are classified as priority 3 streets, and we've worked on them into our operations, and we service them alongside our other priority 3 streets. Staff recommends approval of resolution, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from council? Hearing none.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Ms. Fox? Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Crooms?
Yes.
Resolution 66-18.
Authorizing the city manager to enter into agreement with Franklin County Engineers Office for bridge inspection services within Dublin.
I'll introduce it. Megan?
Good evening. This is another partnership with another governmental entity. Dublin is responsible for the inspection of 53 bridges within Dublin's jurisdiction. It's critical and required by law that all of these bridges are thoroughly inspected annually by a qualified person, as defined by the Ohio Revised Code. In interest and cooperation and efficiency, Dublin and Franklin County Engineers Office staffs have been collaborating on an agreement whereby Franklin County Engineers Office staff will perform the inspections and provide condition rating reports for all the bridges within Dublin's jurisdiction. Staff recommends approval of this resolution, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may
Questions from council?
Are these on, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Who does the inspections now?
So we've actually been collaborating with Franklin County Engineers Office for the past few years. Prior to that time, we had an inspector on staff who had the specialized training to perform those inspections. And upon the retirement of that inspector, that's when we had the conversation. That inspector actually retired at a time where we only had a few months left in the year to complete the inspections that year, so we were at a point where we needed to either look towards a consultant, and then we actually reached out to Franklin County Engineers Office, and it worked out really well for both them and us, so we've continued that relationship since that time. So we do plan at some point to identify another staff in engineering to get that training and get them up to speed to resume those inspections in-house at some point.
So with the soon addition of a suspension bridge, is this going to require a unique and different inspection, or is this something that would fall under this agreement?
According to the Ohio Revised Code and the training that's required, I believe Franklin County Engineers Office staff would be able to inspect that, but we will have that conversation with them to determine whether they'd be comfortable and whether it'd be more prudent to retain the services of a consulting engineer firm.
Thank you.
Chris?
Are these all vehicular bridges?
Yes.
Do we inspect our other bridges?
Yes, we do. Yes, our pedestrian bridges as well.
Is that a separate package outside of this $15,000?
Let me see. Pedestrian. Paul, do you know? Yeah, I know they aren't included in these. I'm trying to think of who performs those. Maybe Bob's staff. I'll follow up on that to see where those fit into our cycle for inspections.
That would be great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ann?
Mr. Reiner? Yes. Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
Mr. Rosa?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan? Vice Mayor Ambrose
Yes.
Crooms?
Okay. Moving on to the other portion of our agenda, Personnel Code Amendment, Chapter 33. Homer Rogers.
Good evening again, Council. This update to the City of Dublin Codified Ordinances, Chapter 33, Human Resources Policies, will accomplish several things. But first, a reminder. This is one place in City Code where the process is identified requiring updates to be reported to Council, and unless Council within 30 days after such report amends or disapproves such amendments by resolution of Council, or such amendments are contrary to the Charter, they shall become effective. So along with a grammatical error correction, the following updates are proposed. The titles of the positions listed as being in the classified service are updated to be in alignment with the changes proposed in the non-union compensation plan amendment proposed earlier tonight. It also inserts police corporal into the list of positions required to undergo a one-year probationary period. It raises the age for initial appointment as a sworn officer to the age of 45 from 35. And then finally, it draws a distinction between the repayment of funds expended for certifications or licenses and tuition reimbursement for a degree-producing program when an employee terminates employment with the city within 1 or 2 years, respectively. Staff recommends these changes be allowed to go into effect as written, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Council have any questions?
It's not a question, it's a suggestion. Changing volunteer services to outreach and engagement. Outreach, for whatever reason, just struck me as not something that, not that we don't outreach, but it seems more like a social service, the word outreach. You know, I guess I'd like to see us consider something else. Even Christina said tonight, connections and engagement. I see that division being, I just don't think outreach is an appropriate name.
I would invite Christine. Is Christine still here? If she wants to address that.
Where are you at?
It's under general provisions where they're going to change the title of volunteer services to outreach and engagement. And outreach doesn't seem like it sounds like a social service.
Right. Well, I see that she's not here, but that's very intentional for that reason. I think what we see at staff, I think you'll agree, is we see our community changing. I mean, the aging is an example of that, and the focus on outreach is intentional. And really, the focus on outreach has to do with understanding the needs of the community as those changes come about, and then connecting them with services. Our community pays significantly to a lot of the social agencies, frankly, within the counties that they lie in, and we want to make sure we're leveraging all of those services and making sure that our community knows about the availability of those services. I think what you saw earlier this evening in the Aging in Place initiative is a great example of making sure we understand all the various services that are available to our community and how we leverage those and increase the awareness of them. So the word outreach, and it's interesting that you mentioned social services specifically, and that's really how we came up with that and why we came up with that notion.
And was that something that Christina and a group came up with? I mean, I'm not saying that I dislike it. It didn't strike me as when I think of that particular area with the diversity, with the Martin Luther King. I mean, it all works. It was just a comment. I'm just wondering if that is. I would just like to hear what council has to say, if there's any thoughts on it. I'm not pro or con.
It is actually a fairly common term used often in conjunction with communications in government and institutions in addition to social services. So I didn't think about it because it's when you mention it, but it's fairly commonly used, okay. that particular.
I'm not against them, just commenting.
Anybody else want to comment? All right. So this is an instance, Homer, where you're asking us to do nothing. If we do nothing, they take effect in 30 days.
It will actually come effective on the 1st of January. That's what we requested in the memo.
Okay.
But in 30 days, it would be.
We have 30 days to act
yes.
to prevent it, but we don't have to affirmatively do anything.
Right. That's correct. Yeah, and this is in accordance with the personnel code. And you might recall last year, at the end of the year, we did this, and we had substantial changes because we had gone through the class and comp study and update and all of that. These are very few changes comparatively to last year. We had not really done that much before. I've asked Homer to really stay on top of keeping this personnel code and so forth up to date and relevant. And so trying to make sure that we are making these adjustments every year. So certainly, and again, this is one of those where as you have time over the next couple meetings to look at that, if you have any concerns or questions, let us know. We'll be responsive to those. Otherwise, yeah, they would come into effect on first.
Without us doing a thing. Okay. All righty. Moving on to the Technology Advisory Committee recommendation. Doug.
Good evening, members of council. We are in a position to have many of our excellent resources around the city provide advice and counsel to the IT function within the city. I'm in favor of this. We want to structure it similar to other advisory committees that are around the city. It is not expected to have directorial authority over us, but truly advice. Keep us on track. Are we moving fast enough? Are we moving in the wrong direction? We have so many wonderful resources. If you agree with this this direction, then doing a motion will create such an advisory committee. So that's what we're recommending.
Doug, can you tell me how these members of this commission, ad hoc commission maybe, would be selected?
I have a number of volunteers who have stepped up and requested that, but I believe what we want to do is select a diversity of qualifications, which would include some academia, some corporate, some subject matter experts in certain technologies. We specifically did not specify a number like 10 or 12 to give ourselves a little leeway, but wanted to impress upon you selecting a committee that is similar to other committees of the city. So diversity, not too large, and a diversity of industries.
When you say similar to other committees in the city, what committees are you referring to?
Other advisory committees, maybe not at the current time, that may have existed in the past.
I think a great example of that might be, well, first of all, I want to recognize and thank Doug for his proactive outreach into the community. He's actually had 2 or 3 of these groups working with him. When he first came on staff, we had several residents come to us about the idea of extending Dublin into residential areas, and he engaged that community and talked to those folks. And then he's had the business community engaged, as well as residents in general who have an interest in technology. He's had a couple of these going on the last couple of years, and certainly could continue to do that. I asked him to bring this forward because I just felt in that we were out there actively engaging these folks, you might want to formalize this a little bit more. And more than anything, I want to make sure council was aware that these groups had kind of came together and actually were taking on more of a specific mission, if you will, as he alluded to in his memo. So this is really about recognizing that. I can think about times like when we had the Solid Waste Advisory Commission, when we were trying to roll out new ideas on refuse and recycling back in the day when it didn't really exist, or we had Tree and Landscape Advisory Commission. We had a Cemetery Commission at one time. Now, these were commissions that were, a couple of them were required under charter. Some of these were adopted by City Council to be in existence with a sort of a end date to their performance and contribution. I think we referenced in this memo a 1-year look, and that we would report back on the success of this, who's involved, and the types of assistance that they're providing us to the city. So this is a little bit loose in terms of, I think another example of this is the Sustainability Advisory Committee that was just established, where for that framework, we had a specific group of folks, and council authorized us to have that advisory committee for that framework plan. This one's a little bit looser because I think it's so new and different. Even the sustainability one, we had done a lot of work through the Community Service Advisory Commission and so forth in establishing that. I like for this one to have a little bit more free-flowing opportunity to it, see who will come forward this first year, and then report back to see if it's something that we might want to formalize, or even have we had talked about some around security,
data privacy,
data privacy, and so forth. It might be another. This group might take some of that on, but that might become a bigger role that we want them to grow into. So,
well, I think it's a fantastic idea. That isn't the point of my question. My point of the question is, how would we advert? So there are so many people that are brilliant in the city of Dublin, and some of them work for companies that are in the city, and many of them aren't. So my question really was around how would we advertise that this opportunity for volunteerism essentially is available. For other boards and commissions, it's pretty simple. We advertise for them in the newspaper and in other ways, and that's probably not the best route to go with this. But I would like to make sure that we don't just go to the folks that we know exist, but that we try to distribute the message in such a way that we're casting a wider net in case there's other people that have some expertise that would be willing to lend it.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think what we want to avoid is saying everyone come volunteer and we have 500 volunteers, and we also want to avoid my 6 friends not coming around. So the advice or recommendations of council as well, I think we can find a balance there. And I also believe that we will bring that back to council in a future memo and say, last month you recommended this, here is the number, these are the meeting dates, and these are the recommended members. So there will be that oversight.
Good. Thanks.
So, I think it's a great idea. Just some couple questions and formats. Are these open to the public meetings? Are these evening meetings? Or, I mean, what is the format of how this group would function?
I would expect them to be evening meetings, but at the same time, I would like those people to have some voice in terms of the format. I don't know that we would advertise to the public, but certainly we don't close meetings to the public. The idea would be more of a back and forth conversation with the City of Dublin being able to say, this is what the technology landscape looks like to us. These are the projects we'd like to come in. Please advise. If there are people in the public who would love to listen in on that, then I can see where there might be room for that. But we don't want to prescribe too much that meetings will be between 5 and 8 on these days of this month and not give them an opportunity to voice their availability in some of those things as well.
You know, the challenge to that is I think we have people who want to come forward and participate and be involved. And I'll give you an example. Last night I was speaking to an HOA, and a woman come up. First of all, she asked me a planted question about the smart corridor in 33, and then she came up to me afterwards and said, hey, by the way, I work for a major trucking industry, and we're into all this kind of stuff. And she does national level sales. And I'm like, where have you been? Climb on board with this activity. And people like this are just everywhere we go. I mean, so, you know, our legal counsel's whispering me to the ear that should be a public meeting, but I also don't want that to stifle the opportunity of people to come forward. So it's that triple helix of government, business, and academia coming together, having these conversations. We'll certainly abide by any rules that we're required to, but it's one of those things where it's a missed opportunity if we're not bringing these people together and saying, hey, what do you think? And it's just our residents, too, who can help us to figure out better ways to communicate and to leverage technology and interacting with them. And the next new great idea comes together in the synergy that you have in a room like that. So I had no intention of squelching Doug and the great efforts that he's having in this. I just wanted you all to know we're out there doing it and just, you know, seeking a head nod about trying to be inclusive and involving people like this. So.
Yeah, and if I could add, the intent also is not just to have information coming our way, but to expand our ability to advocate in the community. So you have technologists who are well respected in our community. They can help us deliver the message to the rest of the residents, as opposed to just having the CIO run around and say, these are important things for us to be thinking about. If we all agree with other subject matter experts, I think it gives credibility to our plans.
Fantastic. Any other questions or comments from council? I make a motion that we authorize the formation of a technology advisory committee. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Rosa?
Yes.
Ms. Fox?
Yes.
Mr. Reiner?
Yes.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Ambrose Grooms?
Yes.
Ms. Saludo?
Yes.
And Mr. Keenan?
Staff comments.
Well, thank you for that, and we will commit to give you periodic reports on that and how that's formulating, so you're well informed. I have 3 items that I just wanted to bring to council's attention. The first one is the Christmas tree lighting. You had a memo in your packet about that. That will be held Thursday, November 29th in Kaufman Park, same as last year. It begins at 5 p.m. and the official tree lighting is at 6:30. So we encourage everyone to come to that. We have a memo in your packet regarding the memorial tournament and the city's investment, if you will, in the memorial tournament and how the city leverages that for its purposes relative to economic development, also acknowledging and celebrating our volunteers in the community, and also to do intergovernmental relations. I hope that memo was helpful. If you have any questions about that, we can certainly try to address those. But the one thing I was looking for, it is in our budget, proposed in the budget for 2019. There was some discussion about this at Administrative Services Committee, but I also want to give you the opportunity, if you want to have a deeper dialogue about how the villa is used, how we leverage it, and so forth at the tournament. We'd like to certainly welcome and have that conversation with council. So I don't know, Mayor, if there's any idea on how you might like to proceed with
this came up, obviously, it's come up with the agenda meeting, and one thing that I had suggested, I'm happy to do it if the group is comfortable with it, and maybe Chris and I working with staff to sort of figure out what the issues are and make some suggestions to bring back to council and kind of maybe narrow what the issues are and some suggestions about what we can do. I know that there were a couple issues that came up that, you know, warrant being addressed, and there's some other issues that fortunately have not yet come up that we also need to address to make sure that they don't. So I'm perfectly happy to do that. If Chris says, I know with her relationships up there, she knows how that operation runs. I'm happy to do that. If that is the will of council, she and I can work with staff and come up with some proposals and issues and discussion points maybe we can do.
Okay.
If that's okay. Hearing no objection, that's what we'll.
That's great. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. And the last item is in your packet is the Auditor of State report, and I had planned to have Angel speak to that a little bit, so I'm going to turn it over to her and ask her to make a few comments about the report.
Thanks, Dana. As Dana mentioned, we included in your packet a copy of the Auditor of State's Financial Health Indicator Report, or FHI, for the city's fiscal year ending December 31st of 2017. This report was created by the Auditor of State back in 2016 based on 2015 data that was intended to establish 17 different indicators that could help an entity determine if they are experiencing fiscal distress. Using data from an entity's audited financials, in our case it's based on our CAFR information, each indicator is identified as having a positive outlook, reflected in green, a cautionary outlook, reflected in yellow, or a critical outlook, reflected in red. Before I touch on the two indicators that reflected a cautionary outlook, I do want to express that the Auditor's Office indicates that no individual FHI is of use in identifying overall fiscal distress. They go on to say that the indicators must be considered together to obtain insights as to whether or not an entity is experiencing signs of fiscal distress. The manner in which these indicators are measured are simply based on numbers input into a system with no explanation or consideration given towards any other information that may improve or worsen the outlook. Having said that, the city saw two areas of improvement based on 2017 financials. That was the unrestricted net position of governmental activities and the unassigned balance of the general fund. There is a very lengthy accounting-based explanation of these two factors within your memo, so for the sake of time, I'm not going to hit on those. Instead, I'll focus on a few moments in reviewing the two indicators that we received a cautionary outlook. The first was indicator number 7, which is the change in the general fund income tax revenue. Given that the city saw a decline in income tax revenue between 2016 and 2017 of more than 1%, a cautionary outlook was generated. As council is aware, this decline was due to two large employers, namely Nationwide and Chase, moving out of the city between those 2 years. The second indicator was indicator number 12, debt service expenditures as a percentage of total revenues. A ratio between 12% to 15% generates a cautionary outlook, which the city received. As outlined in your memo, what this report does not take into consideration is the portion of the city's state infrastructure bank loan that was taken out by the city on behalf of MORPC for the 270-33 interchange. Of this $35 million SIB loan, $25 million is payable by MORPC, while the remaining $10 million plus all interest is payable by the city. While the full loan is reflected on the city's financial statements, the funding for MORPC's portion is never recognized to offset the expenses. Those funds never flow through the city. MORPC's funding for this debt payment comes from their federal funds, which the state of Ohio facilitates, so it comes through the state's doors and gets immediately withheld and paid directly to the SIB program. So therefore, it's never recognized on the city's end as revenue, despite the fact that we are required to show the expenditure. If that payment were excluded, or conversely, if the revenue that MORPC receives to pay that debt service were to be reflected, the indicator would be below the threshold for a cautionary status. Additionally, I'd also like to add that as we have discussed at length, the city's debt service for the 2 parking garages in Bridge Park and the associated roadways is essentially covered by a minimum service payment guarantee. In the year that was analyzed by the Auditor of State's Office in 2017, that minimum service payment had not begun yet. The development agreement started that payment in 2018. So moving forward, we will have revenue to offset that, which would further lower that ratio that the Auditor of State uses as a comparison. So especially when it comes to the debt indicator, the AOS indicates that many times local leaders have made conscientious decisions that may, because the FHI report is an automated process, trigger an indicator as having a critical or cautionary outlook. Those decisions are purposeful and usually are not indicative of a problem. And that's certainly the case in the two, in particular, the debt debt indicator, as I just explained. So we will be posting this report in an effort to be transparent with our community on our website. Last year's report is there as well, along with the memo that we provided to City Council so that residents can take their time if they're so inclined and read a bunch of accounting jargon as to why our position changed on some of these indicators.
Barring any questions or comments, that's all I have this evening.
Committee reports. We already did community development. P&Z.
Well, we got one other.
We have another item?
Yeah, we have one other item. The Community Development Committee recommended that we take a trip to observe our sister cities and also our, you might call them our competitive cities, and to see what's going on. And I think I'll just let some of the people that went on that trip make a comment.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. We saw a lot in about 6 hours, and it was a good tour. We went and visited a few different communities, had the opportunity to speak to some of the staff in some of those communities. And a couple of my takeaways were, although I'm certainly aware of all the activity that's going on in Central Ohio, to actually see the amount of creative development that's going on in the suburbs around us and including us is pretty eye-opening. Almost every community has a development going on. And as we learned, a lot of them are looking towards us, and we're looking towards them as the really lifestyles change and business needs change, what those future developments are going to look like. The diversity in the approach to solving some of the problems I thought was also incredibly interesting and well worth the discussion. I also thought it was interesting in speaking with some of the city staff that joined us in the conversation is just sort of the difference in types of relationships that are happening now between cities and corporations and cities and other communities than what it was even a few years ago when they're developing what they think will be their future both housing and corporate environments. Was illuminating and I think useful for us to think about. So thanks to staff, I thought it was pretty interesting. There is so much going on, and I'm glad we're taking the opportunity as a council to learn from our neighbors. And conversely, we invited them to come spend some time with us, so hope that's the case. So,
a couple of points that I'll bring up. One is I was interested to see how each entity approached what they thought was a way to attract people into their community, both businesses and millennials and others. And one of the things that I had mentioned to John and Kathy that I found a common thread was that in looking at the development of their community, they looked at it holistically, which we do that. But they also are utilizing and promoting what they consider a sort of a spine of green space that occurs in each of the communities we visited. Now, I maybe didn't necessarily so much, we went all over downtown, but in the suburbs, what they were kind of intimating was that corporations and workers want to have a place to go to when they're working that gives them a sense of the natural environment and a place to relax and just enjoy. Being in the office all day is not what the new millennials are looking for. They're looking for a social interaction all day long. And so I see this as a challenge as we begin to develop and really look at Bridge Street, Bridge Park, Historic District, the Franz Road and Post Road intersections, and the DCAP, the Metro Blazer area, because we have the opportunity to create a beautiful span there that will bring all of these places together and create a pedestrian and bicycle transit as well as vehicular transit that would extend from Rings Road all the way almost to Sawmill. And I think that was something that I saw that was strong in the other communities, and I thought we could bring it back here and really think about that. And then the second thing that I would say is that I found it very much fun to sit in the bus with our staff and to brainstorm these ideas. And I would encourage us to do that so much more, because work sessions are great, but the opportunity to just have discussions and throw out ideas and imagine things, I think can get us even so much farther. So I loved that, and I appreciate that. So I thank staff for that.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for a really great tour. I think you hit all the high spots. I mean, there was a lot more we could have seen in each one of those communities that we know about, but we didn't really have the time to go visit with them. But I think what really helped too was I think City Council and Planning and Zoning had a chance to finally see the kind of buildings they would accept by looking at all these different building elevations and criticizing them. I think it was really helpful and should speed up a lot of our processes, both residential and commercial. I think that was a really big help. The other thing that I thought was interesting, in one community, they were still doing, up until recently, sort of, which I thought died out somewhere between, well, it was active between 78 and 88, and that was Class A office buildings and then flipping them and filling them up and putting corporations in them. And I liked the planning. They took a parcel of land and decided this is going to be tax base. And they took us through the whole thing, that hotel there, and a lot of national and international headquarters that were filling up. There was tons of commercial construction going on. And it was strange to find out that something I thought that died out probably at the end of Reagan's term in '88 was still active. And these guys were actually utilizing this particular thing. You know, in that time period, we picked up one Lindclay building in Metro 5 that was sort of like this, and then other buildings by other guys. But they had a developer who had developed all this, a huge amount of tax base. And how many jobs they say they were bringing in? 5,000 jobs into this area. So they took a place like just a parcel of ground, say like the Riviera Country Club, and just declared it, hey, it's going to be a commercial area, and we're going to develop this thing and create tax base on it. And it was a really pretty well thought out plan with a really good, they gave us copies of their strategic plan, their elevations, their maps, and they literally have filled this thing up with tax base and are still building like crazy in there. And that was rather impressive. And there was a lot to learn from, I think, these other guys. If we look back and we think about our advancement going into South Carolina and Tennessee, in one of those endeavors, we came back with the idea for Bridge Street. So these things are unbelievably helpful, and everything that my colleagues have said is true. I mean, we just picked up a lot of really good ideas to implement and to speed up our processes on what is acceptable to us just by looking at one project after another, which are all shooting up like mushrooms downtown, New Albany, Westerville, and just seeing, hey, this is what these guys are doing, but we really don't like this look. So I think that was really beneficial. So I want to thank everybody who took the time out to do that. I want to thank the staff for taking the time out to do it. I think it's a really well worthwhile trip.
Thanks, John. Anything else from?
That's it from community development.
P&Z.
P&Z had a discussion the other night, and I've been talking to members of our commissions about developing, and I know that we're getting support from staff on this, developing a formal education program for our commission members. Utilizing legal to help us with this, consultants to help us with this. We're talking about maybe coming up with some web-based educational opportunities so the commission members can dive into this when they don't have when they have some free time at home. So I'm hoping that we'll come back here to council with some really good ideas on a formalized education program for our commission members. It was positively supported by Planning and Zoning Commission members and gave us a lot of good ideas on what to incorporate, so I'm happy about that.
We had our portion of the budget meeting this past week, so we got through that without too much difficulty. And I think it'll be a valuable time for us all after we have the completion of this operating budget to evaluate the process and see if there's any changes we'd like to see move forward, or if we are happy with the changes that have been made.
Chris, Finance, Michael?
We have our Finance Committee meeting this coming Wednesday. It's at 9 a.m. And the Council Finance Committee of the whole will be meeting on the 14th, pull all those pieces together. So that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Mike. Public Services, Christina?
You already heard from me tonight.
Coda, Kathy?
Thank you. I think it's just been very interesting to watch CODA ridership continuing to grow when we're seeing transportation, and particularly bus-type transportation across the United States, actually a bit in decline. And it was interesting, a lot of the things that we saw on this tour were centered around mobility needs and designs. It was very interesting when we talked to almost everybody that we spoke to. Really, they're thinking about not only what does it mean to build these, but how are we going to get workers to and from these, and that's a central part of it. And it made me think also when we talked about the aging in place, the importance of mobility. I know we didn't speak to it tonight. We're going to speak to it as part of the mobility study. But around and around again, this ability of getting in my car and going there as an individual rider is becoming less and less interesting, both from a planning perspective and from a user perspective. So I'm happy to say that I think CODA is a bit of ahead of that curve, and we're seeing that with some of these partnerships, like with the corporations, and this beginning to build this last mile partnerships. How do we get workers from bus places to places of employment? How do we get communities around? So I think we have some opportunities working with our partnerships at CODAs and others to really to put this in place. And we're seeing it for whether it's scooters or whatever, everywhere we went. Opportunities for us in our planning. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. Dublin Community Foundation, Chris?
They heard their second round of grant request cycles last week, and they'll be deciding on this cycle's successful recipients. So I'll bring that list forward once it becomes available.
Thanks, Chris. Friendship Association, Christine?
Nothing this week.
Morpsey, Chris?
Yes, I went down to the luncheon for the Morpsey Summit on Sustainability, and it was really well done. But there was something that they did there that I thought might be something we might consider thinking about for our state of the city. And they did a Pechakucha presentations, and it's a Japanese word meaning chit chat, but it's a presentation that shows 20 slides. Each slide is shown for 20 seconds, and it was a really fantastic way to present material, a lot of material concisely and as topically. I was really impressed. I know Nancy was there, and we kind of both looked at each other after each presentation like, wow, that was really good. Because, it's 6 minutes and 20 seconds, and you're sitting there thinking, I can dig into something for 6 minutes and 20 seconds. I don't know if I can do the next 35 minutes, but for 6 minutes and 20 seconds, I can be all in. And it was a great presentation style, and I thought it was really fantastic. So I would challenge us to figure out a way to utilize that presentation style, because I think it's worthwhile. And then on first, we had our executive committee meeting for Morpsey, and we concluded our executive director's annual assessment, and they're doing great things at Morpsey, so it's been a very exciting place to be involved. That's all I have.
Thanks, Chris. Logan Union Champaign County Regional Planning Commission, Kathy.
So maybe I'll tie that together with the 33 corridor one. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, how's that?
Sure.
The continued work on putting together the, if you will, zoning overlay along the corridor is moving ahead. And I think I mentioned this last time, but we'll remind that on November the 12th, that an informal review session of that will be at Jerome Township. So really seeing the coordination of the work
both from what it means from a residential build-out and what it means from a technology build-out. So moving ahead.
Thank you, Kathy. Dublin Arts Council, John.
There's going to be a reception Tuesday, November 13th from 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock for a new art exhibit on color therapy. And I don't know if you guys have had many opportunities to go to their openings, but they do serve wine and have nice appetizers, and you can decide whether you like the art or not. So I would highly recommend that you take the time out if you're not doing anything that night and stop in and check out our latest exhibit.
Week from tomorrow, 13th.
That's right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Board of Education, Christina?
Yeah, we met last week. A lot of the conversation revolved around the levy that'll be on the ballot tomorrow. Regardless of where you stand, get out there and vote. It's what we should be doing. And, had an update on some other things. We just had, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Dana. It was just a general kind of wellness check with each other. So nothing super groundbreaking, and no follow-ups as far as I remember. No.
Washington Township. Me. Chief, everything good? All right. What's that? That's right. Council Roundtable. Jane?
Kathy. I want to say thank you to Paul and team and Megan and team for the traffic signal at Post and Highland Croy Road. Can't wait to see when it's fully. There's a big smile going on. I ask them once a week, so I was actually a little disappointed that I didn't get the a snapshot of it, and here it is. So don't ask me again, slide. But I've heard some good buzz about that. So thank you.
John? Michael.
Just wanted to mention to Paul and Megan, the bridge under Glick is working very well, and it's dry, and they did a great job on it. So, and I'm hearing a lot of good comments back on that as well. So, thanks for that extra effort in getting that accomplished. That's all.
Thanks, Mike. Christina. Chris.
Nothing.
Well, I just have one quick thing. The Real Men Wear Pink campaign has wrapped up, and the targeted goal there were 33 people that participated, was $100,000, and it exceeded that to $124,911 donated. And I got a call. I just want to thank Nancy, and everybody up here that's ever worked on anything with Nancy knows it will be done the right way. So I got a call from Nancy about 2 weeks ago, and it might have been a text, in only Nancy's way that she can do this. Instead of saying, why aren't you getting donations, she says, is there anything I can help you with in getting donations? So I said, all right, well, I was rousted from my slumber, and we skyrocketed from number 30 out of 33. We finished at number 4. So we accomplished our goal, and it was all for such a really, really worthy cause. My goal was 2,500, and we came in at just under 4,000. So we came up with some money. And I would echo Christina's comments. I think that we not only have a right to vote, but we have an obligation to vote. So go vote tomorrow. And with that, we are adjourned.